Hello, everybody out on the internet. Welcome to the .NET Foundation Summit. I am going to be your host today. I am Kevin Griffin. I'm the current president of the .NET Foundation, and I'm very happy to have you all here. Looking at the numbers, looks like we actually have a somewhat sizable crowd. So hopefully more and more of y'all show up. Let's just kind of look through the chat. We have folks from Florida. We have Miss Luella from the Netherlands, one of our board members. Thanks, Luella, for hanging out. Hello from Krakow, from Poland. Oh, we have folks all around the globe. I'm very happy that you're all here with us today. So we do have an exciting lineup. So we have three open source maintainers with the .NET Foundation coming to talk to you about their projects and what they're working on, and hopefully answer a couple questions you might have. The goal of the summit has always been to just market. We want to tell you about some of the amazing projects that we steward over in the .NET Foundation, and this is a great way to try to do that. So first things first, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just doing a state of the .NET Foundation. I did a version of this talk this past week at the Tech Bash conference in Pennsylvania in the United States, and I think it was very well received. So I'm going to do a condensed version of it for you all, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. We also will have a couple sponsor segments along the way because we can't do this sort of work without some of our amazing sponsors and partners. But let's jump right into it. I'm going to get rid of the chat so y'all don't have to look at that. Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, I am Kevin Griffin. I'm the president of the .NET Foundation, and I am nearing the end of my term here in the next couple of months. And a big part of being the president of the .NET Foundation has been trying to change a lot of the hearts and minds around just the reputation of the .NET Foundation. We have not had the best couple years leading up to now, and things have radically changed. I'm hoping to maybe answer some of your questions and change some of your minds if you've had a bad taste in your mouth from the .NET Foundation. So if you ever like to talk to me afterwards, I'm everywhere on the internet. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on X, I'm on Blue Sky. Feel free to come and chat me up in any of those locations. Well, let's get into it. If you're here, you're probably already aware what the .NET Foundation is. I'll give you the strict, non-ChatGPT version of our description that we have on our webpage. Is that we're a 501c6 nonprofit established to support a viable open source community. What does the C6 stand for? If you're a person from the United States, you've heard of 501c3, which is a traditional type of nonprofit. C6 means we're a membership-based nonprofit. So our organization is made up of members. And you're probably a member of the .NET Foundation already. And if you're not, it's free to join. We'll talk about that in a couple moments, but we would love to have you as part of our membership. So a couple quick things about the .NET Foundation. The big thing that you should know is that we are a board of directors elected by our membership. We just went through a membership, an election cycle. And our board of directors is 100% non-Microsoft, completely volunteer. This is actually a big change from much earlier boards that were made up of Microsoft members, and I think helped contribute to a lot of the bad reputation that the .NET Foundation has taken on. So we are now all completely non-Microsoft and 100% volunteer. So if you're getting mad at us, you're getting mad at volunteers. We do now serve 3-year terms. That has recently changed over the past couple of months. We used to serve 2-year terms, but we learned just in the cycle of people coming in and out of the foundation, it's much more difficult to try to get any work done when you're rolling off the board in a 2-year period. By the time you figure out what you're doing and you start getting in the cycle of things, you run off the board. So we've moved ourselves to 3-year terms. And Yeah. Uh, Let me introduce the rest of the board. Some of them might actually be in the chat. I don't know if they want to say hi. So I'm Kevin. You've already heard from me. We also have Mr. Glenn Watson. He is the chair of our projects committee, probably our most important committee that we run day to day, because that's the bread and butter of what the foundation does. In chat, we have Miss Lou Creamers. She leads our outreach committee. We have Mitchell Sellers, who is the vice president at the moment. Mr. Chris Woodruff is the chair of our membership committee. So if you've done anything around membership or joined the .NET Foundation in the past couple of months, you might have interacted with Chris. Mr. Kendall Miller is our treasurer. And then we have Mr. Chris Stefanos, who is our founding member. So a slide ago, I said we are completely 100% non-Microsoft, and there's an asterisk next to that, which means there's a catch. Well, Mr. Chris Stefanos is a Microsoft employee. He is our founding member. Per our bylaws, we are obligated to have one founding member from Microsoft always on the board. He does not run for election. He is appointed by Microsoft. We could not have asked for a nicer guy. I love Chris to death. And he is a big part of helping support the projects that we have in the foundation. So if you're running a project out there, more than likely you've interacted with Chris, and you probably attest to what a great guy he is. As I mentioned, we just recently had an election, and we elected Mr. Jay Tower and Miss Irina Dumente. They'll be rolling on here in January, but if you see them around the internet talking about .NET Foundation stuff, that's why they just recently got elected. So what does the .NET Foundation do? I break this up into two categories, and we're going to talk briefly about both of them. First, I think the most important thing that we do is we support projects, and then we also support people. So just folks like yourself out there in the community. We try to support as many folks in the .NET ecosystem as we can. So when it comes to projects, let's just throw out some numbers. We currently support over 130 open source projects in the .NET community. There's a variety of different ways that we do this sort of support. And I break it up into 6 categories, and there's much more to it, but this is probably the best I could do. The first is just general product guidance. We do have a somewhat active Discord server that you could join if you're a .NET Foundation member. And if you're looking at starting a open source project, or you're looking to join an existing open source project, or you've been running one for years and you have just some weird questions that you don't think normal people would be able to answer, you want to go talk to the other folks who have lived that life, who have been in the trenches. We try to offer as much project guidance from project maintainers as we can. And we do that in a variety of different ways. We don't talk about this enough. It's probably one of the bigger things that we spend our resources on, but we provide legal services to different open source projects. And I'm not talking just about like CLA management, but we have worked with a couple nonprofits. We've worked with a couple open source projects where they had a weird legal or contract issue that they needed to help mitigate. We have lawyers as part of our committee who will come in and help answer any questions that we have or that the project has. Now, obviously, we don't talk about a lot of that stuff publicly because no one wants to air their legal business, but we do have those resources available. And if you've ever spent money on a lawyer, you know how incredibly expensive it can be. And that's just a service we can provide to the projects under the .NET Foundation. Most likely the thing I think that is the most critical service that we offer in the foundation is marketing. And that's just telling the world about these different projects. We're going to hear from 3 different projects today, and likely you might not have heard of one of them before. So part of this summit is telling you about the projects that we have. We were having a conversation in our board of directors not too long ago where someone was spouting out a couple different projects. And I have been a .NET developer for going on 17, 18 years. And these are projects that are established and have been around for years and years and years. And I've never heard of them before. They're not members of the foundation. They're just open source projects out there doing good work and solving problems for different folks. But I never heard of them before. And we obviously have a marketing problem in the .NET ecosystem. So the big thing that we try to do in the foundation is just tell people about different open source projects. And we do that in a lot of different ways through our newsletter, through social media, and things like this on YouTube. If you ever contributed to a open source project before, you probably signed a CLA. We provide a system for managing CLAs in the .NET Foundation. That's pretty straightforward. If you're trying to contribute something, you have to sign the CLA. You just get that as part of being in the .NET Foundation. Handful of projects in the foundation also take advantage of some limited infrastructure that we provide. This simply might come down to Azure services. If you need hosting, if you need some sort of backend or Key Vault, we have all that stuff available to us in the foundation, and we provide it to some of our member projects. So if you're out there and you run a project and realize, oh, I could really use some free Azure hosting, well, we have it, just need to ask for it. And last but not least, we offer code signing for any projects out there that need to build binaries. If you've ever gone through the code signing process, you know it can be complicated, it can be pricey, it can be time consuming. I've gone through this on different projects that I've managed outside of open source, and it's a huge headache. You get that as part of the .NET Foundation. So you come in, we will help you sign all your binaries. So anyone that's pulling down your projects can be assured that they're not downloading spyware or malware or anything like that. Now, real quick, I put this in for a much longer version of this talk, but I want to just briefly mention a couple of the new projects that we've added to the .NET Foundation. And there's two categories of these projects. And the first category are the 100% maintainer-led projects. First is Flowtide. If you're doing any SQL out there, you need a high-performance SQL streaming engine. That's entirely in .NET. Go take a look at Flowtide. They recently joined the .NET Foundation a couple months ago. We also recently introduced Cloud Streams for capturing real-time cloud events. We also introduced Ursa Avalonia. So if you're building anything with Avalonia right now and you need an enterprise UI library, Ursa is available to you and is a member of the .NET Foundation. Any fellow SignalR folks out there who love it as much as I do have probably heard of Message Pack, which is a serializer for JSON. It's heavily used inside of SignalR, and they recently joined the .NET Foundation for their C# implementation, just to make sure that it's taken care of and that people know about it. We also introduced Bootstrap Blazor. So Blazor components, if you're using Bootstrap, you might notice in the URL, it's from the organization .NET Core. That's not associated with Microsoft. This is a independent organization based over in China. They just happen to use the name .NET Core, but this is a completely open project. Now, we do have a couple Microsoft projects that have joined the foundation. First and foremost, Dev Proxy. If you need an API simulator for doing testing inside your applications, Dev Proxy is a Microsoft project that joined the foundation. Likewise, if you happen to be doing Kubernetes and you need to build Kubernetes operators and you want to do that in .NET, KubeOps is also a recent add to the .NET Foundation. So welcome to all these projects. We always have new projects in the pipeline, and we have a projects committee that meets every single month to essentially talk about where projects are in their life cycle. The project committee dictates what projects they recommend to the board of directors for inclusion in the foundation. And not all projects are at a maturity level to join the foundation. and I'm not going to comment right now on what criteria they look at. Usually it's at number of maintainers, is looking at stars and forks and all the GitHub stats that you could possibly have. So if you just started a project today and it was just one commit and just one maintainer, and you try to join the .NET Foundation, most likely the wouldn't get past the project committee. But if you are an incoming project, you might not be mature enough to join the foundation, but you still could benefit from a couple of the resources that the foundation has. So in the past year, we've introduced a new category called seed projects. And these are projects that are gaining momentum, but they still don't have all the numbers that the project committee is looking for to push forward to foundation inclusion. So what we try to do as a foundation is we keep tabs on these different projects. We try to do a little bit of promotion for them because, again, marketing is probably the most important thing that we can do as a foundation. And the project committee comes back to them every couple of months just to see where they are. We've had some that have gone from seed into full inclusion in the foundation. We have some that have been removed from the list because they submitted a project but then didn't do any work on the project. So what's there to include? I am just going to briefly talk about some of the seed projects we brought on. Azure Key Vault Emulator. This is a big one I've actually been seeing other people talk about around social media. I very much see this being included in .NET Foundation in the future. But others like Power Thread Pool, Local Stack, etc. These are all great projects. And if you're looking for a project to kind of chip into, I think these are great candidates just because they could use your help. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I said earlier that the foundation has had a reputation problem. And the best part about coming onto the board of directors is you get the full force of that negative reputation because people make up their minds because something bad happens. And all of a sudden, it's now your problem. So I've made it a point to say the board of directors, the foundation has changed. And I want to talk about some of the ways we've changed. So whether or not that makes up for the issues of much previous boards of directors, I can't fix that. But what I can do is I can say how we're moving forward in a different direction. So I'm just calling it the I'm sorry tour. So we had an issue back in 2021 that you may or may not be aware of, where the executive director did a couple things that wasn't jiving with the open source community. First, the executive director committed code into a maintainer's project without asking. They just went around the process. That's a big no-no. So there was a little bit of complaining, and come to find out, there was more complaining to be had because the executive director had also taken over a couple projects and moved them into the .NET Foundation organization. And that shouldn't have happened. So you imagine you're a maintainer and you own a project and you wake up in the morning and your project isn't yours anymore. It has been taken over by the .NET Foundation. So that was cause for alarm. Rightfully so. Like, I'm not going to defend any of these actions. I'm going to say they were wrong. They probably would not have been the way I've acted. And there was a lot of confusion just about what does the .NET Foundation own over a project. And executive director resigned, and the foundation started making a lot of different changes. So lots of structural changes. I come in to the presidency and we see, all right, these were issues. And if you ask random people on Reddit, which I know you shouldn't listen to people on Reddit, but if you listen to people on Reddit, everyone thinks that this is still how the foundation operates today. And that's not true. So we are actively trying to rebuild trust in the community, because if we don't have the trust, it's not worth trying to do this work. The first thing that we need to say is, under a lot of the old licenses. If you signed up as a .NET Foundation member, you had a choice between a contribution license and an acquisition license. So the acquisition license would assign rights to your project, ownership of your project to the .NET Foundation. And some projects had taken advantage of that. And the wording around those licenses are a bit weird. We don't do that anymore. We push all the projects to the contribution license, which simply says that the .NET Foundation has you're giving us a copyright on or copyright rights to your project. And we do that for a lot of legal reasons, things like code signing, so we can sign in your name. We have the authority to do that. But at no point do we have ownership of the project. We have had projects that have left the foundation, and awesome. If you join today and then in 6 months decide the foundation is not where I feel my project should be, you are more than welcome to leave. We have very much limited our Microsoft involvement in the board of directors. When I was going through the election and nomination cycle, I specifically said we cannot have Microsoft folks on the board of directors, because a lot of these earlier comments from folks around the internet, Reddit, whatnot, was, oh, it's Microsoft doing this, it's Microsoft doing that. And when your board is 100% not Microsoft, you can't say that. So this is a foundation run by the community for the community. We also eliminated the executive director position. So when the executive director previously resigned, a new executive director was provided and took over the role. When I came on as vice president, the previous president, Joe Guagno, was working towards removing that position altogether, and that position is now gone. So any decision made by the .NET Foundation was because of a vote by the entire board of directors. And we also try to now be fully transparent about anything we did or do. We're going to talk a minute about Automapper, which some of you might have questions about, but we try to be very transparent about the decisions that we make. And ultimately, the goal of all this is that we want to help projects. I don't want to own a project. The foundation does not want to own projects. We want to provide resources to make these projects successful. And the variety of different ways that we can do that I talked about earlier. That's where we're coming from. And if you felt like you lost trust in the foundation many years ago, maybe I'm not trying to, ask for you all to come back, but I'd like you to take another look at us. Now, on that note, I know a lot of you probably have questions about Automapper, and Automapper is a great tool. And the maintainers of Automapper are great people. Automapper has been in the foundation for a handful of years, except earlier this year, they had a license change. So they went from a completely open source project to a dual license. And the licenses weren't compatible with what the .NET Foundation operates under. So we need a standard permissive open source license in order to be in the foundation. The license change just didn't allow for that. So we had a conversation with the maintainers of Automapper and mutually said, this is a maturity point for open source where you hit the point where you don't need the resources of the .NET Foundation anymore. So we made up a term, graduation, and Automapper left the foundation, and we list them as a alumni project on our website. So there's no ill will towards Automapper. We wish them a ton of success. They're just not going to have any .NET Foundation resources moving forward. And as simple as that. Automapper could always change their license again and reapply to come back to the .NET Foundation. So it's not like they're kicked out for good. All right. Automapper is also not the first project to go commercial. We've had others in the history. Most recently, Avalonia got some VC funding, had to leave foundation due to contractual obligations. No big deal. It's not the first time that's happened. And it's probably not going to be the last time that it happens. All right, wrapping things up, I'm going to do a very quick shout out to some of the people that we support in the .NET Foundation. You probably are on Meetup and you have a Meetup near you, or you operate a Meetup. We support over 231 meetups via our Meetup Pro sponsorship. And I did a little bit of stat finding to see that we've supported 19,000 events over the past 90 days. And that's not us, that's not Microsoft, that's you all setting up these events and attending. We're in contact with 337,000 members around the globe, 45 different countries. The odds are that if you live somewhere around the earth, you probably have a .NET meetup near you. And if you're looking for a meetup and you want to start one, reach out to us, because we would love to talk to you about sponsoring your meetup. And all right, kind of the home stretch. I know this is a long-winded way of getting to the point. What's the current state of the .NET Foundation? My focus when I talk about the foundation is how can we be better stewards of .NET open source? A lot of things have changed, and every decision that we make is towards this question. Are we taking care of the .NET ecosystem the way that we would want to be taken care of? A couple things we've done. So we've tried to start introducing town hall meetings for our projects. I throw this out there. We have not done the best job of doing this. It is insanely difficult to get a group of people worldwide in for one meeting. So this is something that we need to do a little bit better job of, but it's something that we've been actively trying to do. We've been starting a new program called .NET Foundation Buddies. So if you're a foundation project owner, and you should be getting an email from a member of the board of directors. They should be your contact in cases where you have a question, you have a complaint, some sort of grievance. Go to your board of directors and say, I have a problem. Can you help me fix it? This means any one person on the board of directors is ultimately directly responsible for a project, making sure that if it's something they can't fix themselves, that it's communicated to the board and it's a problem that we can address as a larger board. Now, if you're a maintainer out there and you have not heard from your board of director, the email should have went out this past month. You should reach out to me directly, and we'll find out who was supposed to email you. We're also trying to be much better, more diligent about advertising our project updates. So if you're a project and you're doing a new release, or you're looking for maintainers, or just something going on, we want you to tell us, because we want to tell the world through social media, through email, and all that stuff. You probably get our monthly newsletter if you're a member of the foundation. We've started doing a project spotlight over the past year, and that's picking one of our projects and telling you more about it. And so if you're reading the newsletter and you see a fancy project like Steeltoe, we'll talk about it a little bit later, and you go, oh, I've never heard of that before. Read the paragraph, maybe go download it and get involved. We're also trying to spotlight our members. We have a great community out there who help give their time and efforts to the .NET Foundation. We try to pick one person, which is difficult, every single month to just talk about and to elevate. And in a more boring note, we've been trying to define how the foundation should operate. As I mentioned earlier, we eliminated our executive director. We also eliminated a management company that was running the foundation. I never heard this talked too much about publicly, but a good amount of the work that the foundation used to do wasn't by the board of directors. It was a management company that was maintaining meetings and doing a lot of the work. The board just kind of showed it up to do the vote. So now that's all that's gone. We're learning how to be an organization again. I've run my own business for 15 years. I have standard operating procedures for every single thing that I do. And the foundation is slowly growing that documentation for how do you be a foundation. So it should be everything from, if you're applying to be a project, in the foundation, what process should we follow? If you get approved, what process should we follow? And there's dozens and dozens of these different processes that we didn't have before, and now we're trying to establish. Things in funding. I know no one likes talking about money, but the foundation was throwing away a ton of money. Since I've been president, we've reduced overhead by 80%. We were paying for an executive director. We were paying for a management company. So every sponsorship dollar that we got in basically went to another company for no reason. And we got rid of all that. So now we have funds available to distribute and to the programs that support open source and support people. It's great now because we have companies come to us asking us to be partners, and we can say that money 100% goes to the community. It doesn't go into any corporate pockets. And it all ultimately comes back to the question of how can we be better stewards of .NET open source? So if you're out there and you're with a company and you're looking to become involved, we would love to talk to you about sponsorship. And some of the benefits of sponsorship, you get a video during the .NET Foundation Summit. So 4 of our partners took advantage of that today. And just kind of wrapping things up, how do you get involved? If you're not a member of the .NET Foundation, you could join. You can contribute to our project. I know projects would love it if they just don't want your issues. They want some of your fixes as well. So if there's a project that's near and dear to your heart, go look at their issue list and volunteer to take a look at an issue. Submit a PR. I know a lot of projects out there that would just love a little bit of help. And if you have the resources available to you, give back. The hardest part of being the foundation is we have all these different things that we provide, but the hardest thing to provide is monetary help to different projects. And we're actively trying to get to a point where we can do that to some degree. But if you're out there and you have a project that you use daily, and most likely that project is set up to accept GitHub sponsorship or sponsorship through another means, give a couple bucks to a project. I've done this numerous times myself, where a project maintainer has gone above and beyond to help me with an issue that I was having with the library. It's very easy to just expect folks to do the work, and not enough of us reward the projects that actually are putting in the effort. So look at our project list. If there's something that jives with you, give a couple bucks. I know it would mean a lot to the maintainers who are maintaining these projects. Become a member. It's 100% free. The old .NET Foundation, you used to have to pay $100 a year, $100 US a year. Now it's completely free to join, and you just fill out a small form, and it doesn't matter if you're just getting started in .NET now or you've been doing .NET for 20 years. Everyone's available to join. You get voting rights. So we just went through an election. All eligible members got a ballot and were eligible to vote. You can also participate in our monthly meetings. So if you don't like something that's happened on the project side, you can join the project committee and you can voice your opinion. If you're interested in getting more people into .NET, we have our membership committees and our outreach committees, and they're all looking for help. I think they would love for you to attend. And most importantly, you get access to our Discord. So other like-minded .NET developers, we'd love to have you. If you're not already going to a meetup, go find a meetup. I talked about all the meetups we support. We would love to have you at one of our meetups. In the next couple of months, we'll be running elections again. So if you really want to make a difference, you run for the board of directors and you tell us, your opinion. What would you change? What would you add? What would you remove? I think lastly, just you tell others about the .NET Foundation, and if they have a negative view of what the foundation was years and years ago, tell them, Kevin said it's changed, and try to rebuild some of that good reputation that we at once had. But I have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to do a very quick scan of the questions and try to answer any questions that you might have. I apologize. We didn't have anyone in here moderating too. All right. So yeah, if you have questions, drop them in. We'll take questions for the next 2 minutes or so. Hi, Kevin. Hi. All right. Let's see. Will they list open source projects with issues for us to contribute to? I know we just did Hacktoberfest. Llewellyn might be able to chime in on the in the chat about some of the things we've done there. Let's see. Let's see. Tons of meetups. Yep. COVID did have a huge effect on meetups. I absolutely understand. All right. Someone was asking about the .NET Core GitHub organization. That is definitely a place of confusion. It's not necessarily the foundation's place to tell them to change it. It's more we can have that conversation and say, hey, this might be a concern. Would you be willing to change your organization name? Let's see. We can drop so you get the Discord link after you become a member. If you're not a member, if you already are a member and you're not in Discord, let us know. We'll make sure you get the link. Alrighty. Well, I am going to hang out in the chat as well and try to answer any questions that come up. We are going to play a very quick video from one of our sponsors. And then we're going to bring in our first foundation member, Tim Hess, to talk to us about his project. So let's see. Let me queue up the first video. All right. And this is from our sponsor, Payabli. So all of our sponsors submitted videos kind of outlining of their project and what they've been working on. And Payabli is our first sponsor.
Payabli is next generation payment infrastructure for software companies to quickly and easily embed and monetize payments.
What makes Payabli truly unique is through a single API we unify the 3 Ps: payment acceptance from customers, payment issuance to suppliers and vendors, and payops. The payment operational wherewithal and tooling that helps platforms build, manage, and scale their payments business. We are extremely grateful and thankful for all of the partners that we serve. We don't take it lightly that they've entrusted in our people, our technology, to build for their customers and their merchants to facilitate money movement every single day.
We're also a very values-driven organization. Will and I really thought hard about what were the core principles and values that we wanted to run this organization through. We've done a really good job, I believe, as a team, continuing to reinforce and adhere to those core values.
I should unmute. So thank you to Payabli for being a .NET Foundation partner. We're glad to have you. But we're welcomed by our first guest, Mr. Tim Hess. How are you today, Tim?
I am doing all right. You know, it's been a minute since I've been on a stream, but hopefully I don't screw anything up too bad.
No, I don't. I think you're going to be great. I was thinking about that this morning too. I have not done a live stream in a couple of years. So it's, it's a muscle. You got to exercise it every now and then.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, we're going to let you just get into it. So Tim's here. He's going to talk to us about Steeltoe, one of the foundation projects. So if you have any questions for Tim, feel free to add them to the chat. And at the end of his session, we'll pick a couple and let Tim answer them live.
Sounds good.
All right, Tim, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to take myself off screen. It's all yours, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, as we already established, my name's Tim Hess. Thanks again for joining me today. I am a software engineer in the Tanzu division at Broadcom, and I'm excited to talk to you today about building cloud-native .NET applications with Steeltoe. And let's get into it. Just a little bit of background about this project. For those of you that don't know anything about it, Steeltoe is obviously an open source project. It's been developed primarily by employees of a company called Pivotal Software, which later became VMware, and is now part of Broadcom's Tanzu division. The core mission of this project has always been to reduce developer toil by providing modern and cloud-native features that are reliable and easy to use so that you can focus on what makes your applications unique. And more specifically, and a reason why I give you the corporate history, we are a member of the same organization that maintains the core Spring projects for the Java ecosystem. And one of our goals is to bring some of their productivity wins to .NET developers. Now, if that sounds odd to you, just consider that Spring has been solving cloud scale problems for a very long time now. And some of the popular open source options for things like configuration management, service discovery, and application management have been quite well tested. So why not allow those .NET developers to use those same options, especially for organizations that are using both Spring and .NET to build their apps? Steeltoe has been open source under the Apache 2.0 license since 2016. That means it's built with and for a community with all the transparency and collaboration that open source brings. We have no intention of changing that. This framework has evolved significantly over the years, and with our recently released 4.0 version, we've made it feel more .NET native than ever, while still offering the same familiar features and interoperability with Spring projects where it makes sense. So speaking of that 4.0 release, I'll just spend a minute on what the big deal is. This has been a very significant release for us, and it's a major step forward in a number of ways. First of all, it requires .NET 8 or above. This move allowed us to take advantage of some of the latest features in .NET and the performance improvements, and it ensures that we're all building on a modern supported platform. As part of that move, we updated all of our dependencies to their latest stable versions so that we're getting the best security, performance, and compatibility with the .NET ecosystem that's available today. And one of the biggest improvements in the framework itself is cleaner, more consistent APIs. We conducted a comprehensive review of our entire public surface area, enhanced XML documentation, particularly in places where it was missing. We eliminated duplication, and we improved the clarity. Now, if you think about it, this is an open source project that's been in development for almost a decade. There's a lot here. There's contributions from a lot of different people. So we took a step back and we tried to clean it all up and make it much more consistent. In the process, we dramatically reduced what's publicly accessible so that it's clearer where you should and shouldn't try to hook into it, and so that we can evolve the framework internally with less of a risk of breaking your code. We've also improved our own tooling so that our builds are faster and catch more issues, and that we will push out fewer breaking changes going forward. We've also embraced a number of modern .NET features, some of which were not even around when Steeltoe was originally written. I'm talking about things like nullable annotations throughout the code base, so there are fewer null reference exceptions. We're using IOptions in more places so that we have easier runtime reconfigurability of the various components. And we've removed some of our own abstractions that were duplicating some of the functionality that's offered in Microsoft's libraries. We're also now embedding JSON schemas for the configuration of the packages directly in the packages themselves so that you get IntelliSense and validation right in your IDE when you're editing app settings.json files. And we've also embedded the debug symbols in the packages so that you can step directly into the source code if you ever need to. Finally, we did remove some components that were either rarely used, had better alternatives, or just weren't maintainable with the capacity available on our team. So these changes were primarily affecting components that interacted with the Kubernetes API and also the messaging and stream components, which incidentally I was very sad to remove. They barely had a chance to get off the ground, but the messaging and stream components in particular were still very, very Spring-like. And when we removed them, it was about 150 lines of code. The guy who built that for us ended up retiring, so we just had no ability to continue maintaining it. So we just had to cut it out. The result of all these changes, though, is a much leaner, more focused framework, and we have an easier and safer path forward for providing updates in the future. So what does Steeltoe actually provide? I'll give you a quick overview of the components before we actually dive in. Configuration is one of the most popular areas of Steeltoe. We provide several configuration providers that all plug into iConfiguration. We also offer connectors, which are for transforming cloud credentials into connection strings for databases, message queues, and a bunch of other services. We also have service discovery, which of course allows you to register your services or find and connect to other service instances on the fly while you're running. We offer features for application management, which is primarily HTTP endpoints that are compatible with actuator endpoints that Spring Boot offers. This is for things like refreshing your configuration, performing health checks, managing log levels, taking memory dumps, and more. And we also have several packages related to application security. So more specifically about configuration management. One of the fundamental principles of cloud-native applications is that your configuration should be separate from your code. So you shouldn't have to change your application code when you're moving from your local system to your test environment, your staging environment, and into production. Only the configuration should be changing. And all of the Steeltoe configuration libraries are built as iConfiguration providers, so they're very natural to use from .NET. You can use the same patterns you're already familiar with, whether that's reading the values directly from iConfiguration or using the options pattern. The demo that I'm going to run through in a moment is going to use the Spring Cloud Config Server for centralized configuration management. The config server is one of the most popular components in the Spring Cloud ecosystem because it allows you to simplify and centralize the configuration for distributed applications. And config server itself includes far more features than I actually have time to cover today. So if it sounds interesting to you and it's new, just know that we're only scratching the surface. One of the core features is conventions in config server. And as I'm sure you already know, .NET apps are always going to start with an app settings.json file. And then we have the app settings.environment name.json convention, where the environment name aligns with ASP.NET Core environment. Config server has that idea too, and Steeltoe actually hooks into the same ASP.NET Core environment to automatically integrate with it. But since config server is built for distributed applications, there are additional conventions that make it easy to keep a number of applications, even across a number of different technologies, in sync while maintaining a single source of truth. The config server supports multiple file formats, and you can organize your files by things like file name, environment name, or several other patterns. The most common way to use this config server is with a Git repository, so you can store all of your configuration files in a version-controlled place, and you can keep track of all those changes and know exactly what changed when and how. But then the config server will distribute those values for all of your apps however they need to get refreshed. Steeltoe also supports several more fairly powerful configuration providers. We have a placeholder provider, which you can see an example of in this slide. We've got this $ curly brace format where you can embed some other configuration key, and you can actually daisy chain them a bit. So you could have multiple fallback values and ultimately some default value if none of the config keys were found. We also have this Cloud Foundry environment variables provider for parsing VCAP application and VCAP services for integration with Cloud Foundry-based platforms. Just as a quick aside here, I'm probably going to mention Cloud Foundry several more times today. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. You don't need to know anything about it to use Steeltoe, and you don't need Steeltoe to use Cloud Foundry. It is a platform that's near and dear to me, though, and I think it's one of the best places to run Steeltoe enhanced apps. But moving on from that, we also have a random value provider for generating things like random strings, numbers, and goods. It can be used particularly effectively with the placeholder provider. We also have a decryption provider, which is compatible with a Spring Boot system. And so the idea there is you might have configuration values that are stored encrypted, and then your Steeltoe app or your Spring Boot app is going to read those down and then decrypt them while the app is running. We also have a Spring Boot configuration provider, which is there to provide compatibility for several other Spring-related scenarios that we're not going to get into today. All right, let's talk about this demo app. I'm going to be running several demos today out of one distributed application, and it was built from the Aspire starter app template. I imagine most of you have already seen that before, but you can tell from this diagram that it's a little bit more complicated than the standard front-end, back-end scenario that comes in that template. So in this app, we've obviously got the standard front-end, the .NET Web Service back-end, but I also added a Spring Boot API that, for the simplicity, does the exact same things that the .NET API does. But we added a Spring Cloud config server, a Eureka server, and a Spring Boot admin server for showing what actuators can do. And obviously, all of this is going to be orchestrated with Aspire. And of course, related to that note, some of the APIs that I'm just going to kind of hint at today aren't actually public yet. We haven't released anything in the space because this Aspire integration is still a work in progress for it. For us. So you're going to see some code that you can't quite use yet, but everything that you can use is still easily achievable without the Aspire orchestration. So let's go take a look at what this actually looks like. That's the wrong one. All right, here's my app host. We're building a distributed application, and I don't think that's sharing what I wanted to share. Let's try that again. There we go. Baby. Kevin, come back. My screen share broke. There it goes. Okay. Okay. One more time in the app host here. Building a distributed application. And these are several of the experimental methods. We're just spinning up some container images here. And all three of these examples are going to be Steeltoe development images. We produce these images so that we can develop Steeltoe. These are not production ready images. They just support the core functionality that we need to do our jobs. In the case of config server, Eureka server, and actually the Spring Boot admin server, they are just plain old Spring apps that have a package reference to whatever it takes to make that particular server get up and running. In this case, well, I'll come back to it. So we also got our API service that we're building out here. We have the Spring app and the web app front end. Back to the config server specifically, I'm pointing it at a local folder to read these configuration files. And inside that file, it's just YAML. So this is our standard weather API summary options. Really basic example. But in terms of how that's actually used in an application, we'll take a look at my API service. And in terms of adding the reference to the config server, it's really just one line of code. In this case, we're doing something fancy here where we're passing in this logger factory. The Bootstrap logger factory is something that we provide as part of Steeltoe. So we're doing this config server configuration provider. If you've ever worked with configuration providers, you may know that the logging subsystem isn't available yet. So we just have this Bootstrap logger that has a basic configuration that will spit out console logs and debugger logs. And it's just a nice, easy one-liner so that you can get logging out of a configuration provider when you wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. For this app, with the configuration that we're reading out of config server, we are binding that weather options that we saw in the application YAML file to the weather options class, which if we go take a peek at that definition is a nice basic, just plain old .NET. It's a list of strings. And then in terms of how we're actually using that, we're injecting an iOptions snapshot so that it reads from configuration on every HTTP request. And we're just using a random selection of those summaries to produce our extremely reliable weather forecast. So what does this actually look like? And of course, we're doing something similar on the Spring side, but I'm not demoing Spring today, so we'll just forget about that implementation detail. Let's take a look at what this distributed app looks like from the Aspire perspective. You can see all of our individual components here are up and running. We got our 3 infrastructure services, and we got our 3 app services. The UI for this web app is, of course, your standard Blazor interface, and here we're getting a weather forecast. Nothing particularly unique if you've seen any Aspire demo in the last couple of years, but here it is. Let's see where the power of this config server comes in. If I go back to the file that's serving my configuration, application YAML, there's a few options here for the forecast, but we're approaching winter, so let's just get real negative about it and just say, you know what, I don't care what the forecast maybe should be. It's freezing. It's always freezing because it's getting colder, so it's always freezing to me. My configuration, the config server is already up to date. I can see I got this handy link here for the default config. I talked earlier about some of the conventions that are available. The default settings will appear to any app that connects. When you're reaching config server, the path for the configuration can be things like your app name and your environment name. That's typically how the Steeltoe client is going to work. So we can see that any application that connects, regardless of what environment name it uses, is just going to get this one setting for freezing. Let me just switch that back real quick so that you can see what it all looks like. Boom, all the summaries. So a nice quick instant update there. No surprise, that's not particularly fancy. Where things get interesting is how our apps get those updates. In the case of the Spring app, I don't have anything hooked up that it would receive the app in real updates in real time. So it's still got the old values here, right? So just double checking. Yep, it should only say freezing if it's getting the latest config data. It's not. If I look at my .NET app, which was again using the iOptions snapshot, that in and of itself isn't enough to get the latest versions. It is all updated to freezing, but why is my .NET app updated and my Spring app isn't? Well, we have a neat little feature in Steeltoe that I activated with the config setting here. We set it to poll the config server every 10 seconds. You probably don't want it to poll every 10 seconds. If you imagine, maybe you've got 100 app instances in your environment. If they're all polling the config server every 10 seconds, that's a lot of traffic. So there's a different pattern that you can use, and that is to use something like the refresh actuator, which we'll get into the actuator details different later. But just real quickly, we have a quick little option here to refresh configuration. So that'll do an HTTP request in the background to go get the updated configuration in the Spring app. And now when we do that update, it's up to date. So depending on the different strategies you want to use, all of the different apps can get that updated configuration in their own time. Okay, that is enough about config server. Let's get back to some slides here. Talk about what's next. Steeltoe connectors is the next component area. I don't have a demo for them in this talk today, but they are still a valuable part of the Steeltoe ecosystem. The purpose is to automatically transform cloud platform credentials into connection strings. So the idea is that when you run on Cloud Foundry or some other platform that offers a service binding implementation, a relationship is formed between your app and the backing service called the service binding. And generally, you're going to get credentials that are unique to that service binding so that you can use them in your app. Usually, they're going to be provided on Cloud Foundry through environment variables like VCAP services, or if you're using the Kubernetes flavor, there's a key per file style where the file name is the key and the file content is the value. And parsing these values across these various scenarios can be error prone and tedious, but Steeltoe makes it easy and provides one-liners for it to do it all automatically. There's a bunch of different services supported: SQL Server, MongoDB, MySQL, Postgres, just to name a few. But the idea is that we read the service binding, extract the connection information, and provide it to your application through standard .NET interfaces. So it's just all automagic. The next component area is, I completely skipped over it earlier, but the demo does rely heavily on service discovery in order for finding those backing services. In a microservices architecture, you need to be able to find all of your service instances, and hard coding URLs doesn't always work when service instances can come and go, or maybe you want to define your own load balancing policy that operates in the client, or maybe you just don't trust DNS anymore after it's caused too many outages for you. In any event, Microsoft, with the launch of Aspire, did add their own first-party packages in the service discovery space, but in combination with Spring, Steeltoe is providing service discovery and service registration features, actually for almost a decade now. With Steeltoe or Spring, service instances register themselves with a registry when they start up, so that other apps can discover the addresses of those service instances using a shared key called the service name, rather than needing to know the address in advance. And just like externalizing your configuration, when you use this pattern, it makes your applications even more portable. Actually, with Steeltoe, we offer a feature that is also found on the Spring side that's called Discovery First Configuration that combines these two items. So if you go to the absolute extreme with it, the only configuration that your app needs when it starts up is the address of the service registry. Some of the other features that are key in Steeltoe, well, client-side load balancing, as I already mentioned. We do provide random and round-robin algorithms by default, but we also provide abstractions so that you could write your own least cost routing or whatever other algorithm you can think of. We, of course, have an HTTP client integration so that it's extremely easy to use. And we also provide the facility for automatic registration and deregistration when your app has a graceful shutdown. And we provide support for Spring Cloud Netflix Eureka, which is what we'll be using in the demo, but you could also choose HashiCorp Console, or there is a configuration-based provider, but you probably would only want to use it locally since it's going to be completely static. But it's good for using a registry, for not using a registry, but still using the same patterns. So let's go back to the code and take a look at how this works. All right. Again, we've got this container startup here. You can see in our API service that we're doing this with Eureka registration. This, again, is going to be one of our prototype APIs. It's just doing some basic configuration here. So this isn't the magic of how you actually add it to your app. We've got just a different prototype for the .NET configuration key format versus the Java configuration key format. Looking into an application for how we actually trigger this. It's, again, just a neat little one-liner. Our prototype version for Aspire is here. Without Aspire, it's still just a one-liner. You would just add Eureka Discovery Client. In this case, though, with the prototype, we're saying that I want this application to register itself, but I don't want it to do any lookups. So we can save some background cycles in terms of connecting with Eureka to see what's available. You can choose. A lot of times your apps are going to either register or discover. They're not going to do both. So you can save some cycles by efficiently picking which option you want to use. In terms of actually doing that discovery side, if I click down here into our web front end, this is going to be very, very similar to the standard Aspire situation where you actually have your service name here. This isn't a host address. This is the key for doing that lookup that I was talking about. And one thing that is a little bit funny about this, if I click back in here and show you back to the app host, the standard Aspire format is that you're going to look up by this service name. This demo, like I said, is funky because I'm doing a .NET app and a Spring app. So I have both of my services not registering with these names, which is what's on the dashboard. But in the configuration, I've got them both set to log in with just weather service as their Eureka instance name. So if we go back to our Aspire dashboard here, Eureka has its own handy little dashboard, which, again, this is getting a little bit redundant. We've got discovery plus discovery plus discovery. Whew, gets crazy. But the Eureka service discovery is going to be much more useful for you when you're not running locally. If you're in an environment, well, in any kind of server environment where you want more options than what DNS provides you, or maybe you've got a different multi-data center strategy. There's any kinds of really complicated scenarios that you would come up with. But anyway, we've got here our weather service application, and there's 2 instances of it available. And you can see that I've got 2 very differently set host names here. But ultimately, they're both working, and I can't see it from here. If I stop my API service, that'll get us something a little bit more interesting. We go back to the Eureka dashboard, and it should update pretty quickly. No, not today. Okay. There, okay, it's gone. And then, of course, because of this being built for a cloud environment, there's some additional caching that's built into the service discovery client inside of Steeltoe, so that, for example, if the Eureka server were to go away for 30 seconds, all of your apps wouldn't go down because they maintain their own local copy of this application list. We go in here, and all of this is still working, even though half of my service instances are now gone. If we go take a look at the traces, that's another way to see what's going on here. I'll filter this down so that we don't see all of the unrelated requests. We can see now this one's on me. In my demo, I didn't get the Spring app to send its traces correctly to the dashboard, so you can see pretty instantly at a glance. This one went to the .NET app backend. This one went to the Spring app backend, and all of these recent requests are going to the Spring app backend. So if we fire that instance back up again, it'll show up on the dashboard pretty quickly. And then we can initiate a few more requests here. And back to our traces. Filter it back down again. And you can see that we're getting 50-50 between Spring and .NET again. All right. Did I miss anything there? Nope, I think that's all I wanted to cover on that. Let me clean out some of these tabs and kick it back into the slides. Okay, that's service discovery. Let's talk about application management and monitoring. Steeltoe provides Spring Boot compatible actuators. Now, these are endpoints that, for our purposes, are exposed over HTTP that give you insight into and control over your applications. We only offer over HTTP. Spring offers over the JMX protocol as another communication option for interacting with these actuators. We originally built them with the idea that maybe at some point you could do other abstractions, like maybe you wanted a RabbitMQ actuator interface. That hasn't really happened. There isn't another client that exists for the front end. The only clients that I'm aware of for reading actuators are HTTP based, so that's just what we're sticking with. Today in Steeltoe, we offer around 13 different endpoints, but we also have some abstractions available so that you could add your own actuators. So there are some that exist on the Spring side that don't exist on the .NET side. It'd be great if we got some contributors out there that said, you know, I really want to see the sessions actuator and I absolutely want to make it happen. That'd be great. Come on in. Let's see if you can help figure it out. But for the actuators that exist today, one of the most popular is for dynamic log level management. I'll show you this in a minute, but the idea here is that you can turn individual loggers off and on, just like you would normally do with the app settings.json file, but now you can do it with an HTTP request. And so obviously you don't have to restart your application or anything. And you can very quickly tune those logs up and down. We have an info endpoint that quickly lets you get application metadata, like get commit info, build version, or we also offer an iInfo contributor interface so that you can determine anything, whether it's static at build time or something that updates dynamically while your app is running. And it can contribute that to the out endpoint. And we also offer health checks, which isn't anything new for the .NET space. We have our own interfaces that existed before the other .NET health check interfaces, but we do also read the Microsoft health check interfaces as well, and we can output them into more of the Spring output format for things like Spring Boot Admin and various other things. We also offer heap and thread dump endpoints primarily for debugging production issues. So you can just do an HTTP request and you can find out what's in memory in my app. We have a refresh endpoint that I showed briefly earlier with the Spring app that triggers configuration reloading. And obviously you can pair that with config server if you want to take full control of when your configuration gets refreshed. In a minute, I'm going to show you how these actuators work with Spring Boot Admin, which is yet another open source project that provides a web-based UI for aggregating the actuator endpoints from multiple applications so that you can go to one single dashboard, just like with the Aspire dashboard, but you can manage all of these services running in any environment and interact with their Spring Boot compatible actuators. Ideally, in the future, I'd be okay with not using Spring Boot Admin in the future. The only reason we do it is for local development with Steeltoe. I'd much rather see an integration in Aspire for working with these endpoints. And so hopefully we can get to work on that pretty soon. Separate from actuators, it's still in the management space. We also offer some other abstractions for doing administrative tasks. These are going to be triggered at startup through command line parameters. This feature was, again, built for Cloud Foundry specifically. There's this option called CF Run Task, where you can trigger this alternate endpoint into your application and do things like database migration. So, for example, if you're using Entity Framework Core and you don't want your database migrations to process automatically, you can make it so that you have to run this command and it will go read the database and update the schema accordingly. All right, so let's go see what this actually looks like now. All right. You know, I should probably show you the code first. Again, nothing useful in the addition of the container itself. I do have this, again, prototype endpoint that sets just a bunch of configuration flags. Because these management endpoints can deal with some highly sensitive information, we do tend to operate them as secure by default. So you have to tell Steeltoe that, okay, I already added them to my application, but I do actually definitely want to expose either some specific list of the endpoints or all of them. For the purposes of what we're trying to do with Aspire right now, it's, you know, a local development experience. So it should be safe-ish to have all of that just exposed without any kind of security on it. So we just say, yeah, go ahead and expose everything. And when it comes to health, show me all of the components that contribute to health, show me all of the details. And then these are just a couple of health groups that are available with that endpoint. And then, of course, you know, like I said, this is all prototypes. So we've got terrible names. If I don't want this with actuators thing to always configure the Spring Boot admin client, but that's just what it's doing for today. In terms of the magical bit that actually adds the actuator code to your application, it's, again, going to be a non-dramatic one-liner. It's just add all actuators. And then it goes ahead and it adds all of those actuator endpoints and all of the underlying infrastructure to the DI container and wires that all up for you with the HTTP middlewares and everything. And then there is a separate one-liner to add that Spring Boot admin client. Okay, so let's actually look at it while it's running. Like I said, there's a web interface. We can see that I've got 3 different services registered with it. If we look, let's just take a very brief look at the Spring app, just so you can see the thing that was built for the thing. You get a whole bunch of information. Well, they don't have any info here. That's probably my fault for not setting something up. But we've got a health response here with a bunch of different components, and you can see detailed information. Again, this is probably nothing new or revolutionary, but it's cool that you can activate it with, you know, a single line of code and all of this just lights up. But there's, you know, a bunch of things here. You're going to see more things on the Spring side than there are on the .NET side. But I'll click over here and we'll go take a look at one of these .NET ones. This is the Steeltoe weather service. So this is that API app that we've been looking at. You can see there's Git information. So this is just set by MS build properties to read in that get info, spit out a get.properties file. But at a glance, with my running application, you imagine this running in production. You're like, well, is the version that I think is running there actually running there? Well, this will go ahead and give you the actual commit shot and even a timestamp. And, in case there was any doubt, you can confirm what repository it came from, things along those lines. Again, we've got the health information over here. Let's look at a different actuator. The ENV actuator is a really useful one for debugging what's going on with your configuration. This, in the Steeltoe implementation, will break down your configuration based on the provider. So I can see that we had an environment variables configuration provider that found that this is the development environment, this is the URL you're supposed to run on. And then because this is that layer cake model of iConfiguration, all of these kind of stack in order. So this is our base layer, and then everything that comes down below is overriding it. So you got app settings.json is telling me that, oh yeah, when you connect to the Eureka instance, this is your app name. And it all just kind of stacks on from there. I don't know if there's anything else interesting in this particular example, but it's a really cool way to debug what's going on with your different configuration providers. The Beans actuator is not a good name at all for .NET. We like to call this the services endpoint on our side, but again, going back to the Spring Boot compatibility, in order to get something to show up in Spring Boot admin, we're showing it under Beans. But this is all the services that are registered in the DI container, and you can get an insane amount of detail here, like the name of the thing. Well, this isn't a good example. Let's find another one. Some of these somewhere have dependencies. Yeah, this one. Okay, so whatever that ridiculously long thing is, has a dependency on an iLogger provider configuration. And so if you've got issues with certain things not working right, this is another way to dig into it and figure out what's going on. The loggers actuator is, again, one of the most useful. I was doing something with Eureka earlier. And so I actually, if I were to go look at the logs and the other thing, we'd probably see that there's a bunch of, you know what, that was my other app. There is a bunch of detail in the loggers. And let's imagine that my application is running in production and it's filling up the logs because there's just too much data coming out. You go in here and you search for that namespace that in this case was a problem. And look, you can see that everything in Eureka was set down to trace. Well, you know what? My Eureka setup is good to go. And I know that I can turn it back down to trace if I need to later. So for now, I could just say, boop, that's off. I don't want those Eureka logs, and they'll just be totally gone from the output. So you can see here that we were dumping a ton of Eureka logs here before, and that should stop now. So that's one of the interesting use cases for that, the loggers endpoint. There are some additional diagnostic things that we can do. I mentioned earlier heap dumps and thread dumps. I'm not going to do a heap dump and diagnose the memory issues or anything like that here. But this is kind of a neat view of the running threads that your application has. So again, you can drill down into it and find out, okay, what is this thread doing? Well, it's our OpenTelemetry batch exporter. That's kind of cool. Lots of different things you can do with it and get all kinds of different insights. So, what happened right here, whatever the case may be. Okay. Also, we have a mappings actuator. So this you can see, like, these are all of the different things that can respond to HTTP requests. You can see whatever this error page is, probably because this is a Blazor app. It responds to GET and POST requests. So this shouldn't just be a nice, convenient place to go to find out, like, what does this application respond to? There's also the HTTP exchanges. So this is all the things that came into the application and how the application handled it. You can drill down and see, oh yeah, what was my response? This was a 200. And we've got, protections on this. So you're not accidentally logging sensitive data. I think this is the ones that do show up, I think were explicitly whitelisted, but all that's configurable. Okay, that is a lot about actuators and Spring Boot. Let me just take a quick peek at the chat here. We got any good questions here?
No questions at the
Okay.
moment. I've
Okay.
asked folks, but yeah, no questions. So keep going.
Okay, I see this. There's one about expire any template curl of array. I don't know exactly what that is, but I will say that we do have some .http files for the actuators that are available as well. I don't think I included them in this particular sample, but if you're interested in such a thing, if you go to the Steeltoe samples repo, which I think I have a link to this at the end of the presentation as well. We have samples for every one of the Steeltoe components. And for example, if you drill down into the management one, there is an HTTP file here. And this has all of the actuators that are supported with some example requests for how to interact with all of that. So going back to that loggers example, if you wanted to change the log level, the HTTP thing that happens here, you just do a post request to the loggers endpoint with the namespace or the logger name that you want to change and the level you want to configure it to. So it's pretty easy to work with. But okay, that is probably enough about endpoints. I'll time check here. I better keep clipping along here. The last major Steeltoe component that I wanted to discuss, I don't have a demo for it today, but it's Steeltoe security. Is primarily focused on Cloud Foundry related technologies. So it's going to be probably pretty unfamiliar to most of you, but it's really useful in the Cloud Foundry space. So there's this thing called UAA, which is called the User Account and Authentication Server. It's kind of the core of authentication on the Cloud Foundry platform. But on top of that, there's this SSO tile. We just provide some extensions that customize the ASP.NET Core security libraries to work with SSO for OpenID Connect and JWT. We also offer a specialized flavor of certificate authentication. This, again, is a customization of the ASP.NET Core library, but Cloud Foundry provides these application instance identity certificates. Every instance of every application that runs on Cloud Foundry is automatically provisioned with a certificate. And these certificates are rotated every 24 hours, and they include some metadata, including what org and space the app lives in. So if you're running on Cloud Foundry, you can do very simple, this service is authorized to make this call kind of checks with it. And then we also have a library for extending the Microsoft data protection libraries to work with a Redis or Valkey instance that was provisioned on Cloud Foundry. Okay. Outside of all of the core components, we do also have something that's inspired by the Spring Initializer, which is one of the things that made Spring Boot incredibly popular. You can go to start.spring.io and get a project that's pretty much guaranteed to work. And now that might seem a bit foreign to .NET developers. We love our .NET templates. They're extremely powerful, and .NET has a bunch of them out of the box. So it might not make the most sense at first. But the idea is not just, oh, here's a basic thing. It's the combination of things that make a template valuable. And with all the success that we saw on the Spring side, we wanted to have it for the Steeltoe side. So we do have start.steeltoe.io, which is the Steeltoe initializer. And the front end of it is just a fork of Spring Initializer. But then we have a bunch of services behind the scenes that work with a .NET templating engine to make it all work kind of similarly. And because we have it all based on a .NET template, you can use it with .NET New or any IDE like Visual Studio. So like the Steeltoe template itself isn't necessarily that revolutionary, but the idea is that you can fork it and make your own customized version that embed your organization standards, your preferred dependencies and versions, your best practices, and even your own internal libraries, if that's what you want. It looks like I'm a bit short on time, so I'm not going to do a demo on it. But if you want to check it out, it's just start.steeltoe.io. And one of the reasons that I like to use the Spring Initializer is sometimes with the Steeltoe work, I need to do a thing in Spring, and I don't really know how. So I just go to start.spring.io and pick the things that I know that I need, and I can see what it spits out. So it's like, well, I just want to take a look at the pom.xml file. And you can see the changes between different versions of the runtime or the Spring Boot versions or whatever it is. And you can just go at a glance, see what changes if X, Y, or Z without having to spin up a whole new project. Or maybe you do walk through those steps and find out this is exactly what I need. Let's go ahead and let's build it. Honestly, that's actually how we build the Docker images that we use for config server, Eureka, and for Spring Boot admin. It's an incredibly easy way to get started, especially if it's something you're not particularly familiar with. Okay, skip the demo. Just kind of a note here. Previous versions of Steeltoe were built for older .NET Framework stuff. So .NET Framework support does technically exist with Steeltoe. I relatively recently heard that ASP.NET Core 2.3 was released earlier this year, which was just a re-release of 2.1. But apparently .NET Framework is on Core is supported again. I'm super curious if anybody out there is interested in Steeltoe on this setup. Definitely do let us know if you are interested. We are extremely unlikely to go dive in and revisit this unless there is interest, because it's probably going to be a lot of work. Even just to get started with the .NET Framework on Core is a bit of a lift. And that's it for me today. So we've got the Steeltoe accounts on the socials. I've been online for forever. You can find me. I'm not usually the loudest online. I'm too busy with my head down getting work done, but more than happy to engage on anything in general.
Awesome. All right, everyone. We have a couple minutes to spare. If you have questions for Tim about Steeltoe, now is the time. Drop them in the chat. I know Tim can see the chat, so yeah, drop your questions. Tim, while we give folks a moment, we have a lot of people asking about getting involved in projects. Is Steeltoe looking for help? Is it easy for someone to jump into Steeltoe as a first-time contributor?
There's probably more that we could do to make it easy to get started. Honestly, with this 4.0 release, one of the areas that we kind of glossed over was some of the getting started guides that we have. So we have a whole host of getting started guides that were built for Steeltoe v3. So if somebody was interested in getting started, it might be interesting to actually try those getting started guides and see if you can figure out how to make them work with Steeltoe v4. We put more of our efforts into a more comprehensive guide that was like, if you're on this API, move to that API.
Yeah.
And something we have to come back around to is these guides. So that would be an interesting way to get to know the framework and help out. Yeah,
I think we always underestimate how much help documentation is to different projects. So that's a great point. If you're looking to get started on any project, not just Steeltoe, look at documentation. That's how I got my start, was just writing docs for different projects.
For real. It's definitely the easiest way to get started. And you'll find that a lot of OSS projects have, a pretty small core team that aren't necessarily doc writers in their profession. And, like we don't have a doc writer. We've never had a doc writer. So it's like what the engineers come up with. Like, I'm pretty good with the English language, but I'm not a doc writer. Yeah. So anybody can help fix those issues.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I don't see any questions coming in, but everyone out there, you have Tim's information if you'd like to ask any follow-up questions afterwards. Tim, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. We're going to let you go, Tim. I'm going to play another sponsor video, and then we're going to be joined by Tomas, who's going to talk about .vvm. And let me get that queued up right now. So the sponsor we're going to talk about next is our friends over at Volosoft. They have a project called ABP, which you may have heard of, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about ABP.
ABP Studio is a cross-platform desktop app for ABP developers. It simplifies every stage of development, automates repetitive tasks, and provides a faster path from idea to production. Starting a new project takes minutes, not hours. Whether building a simple app or a microservice solution, ABP Studio generates a production-ready base with best practices, layers, and modules in place, so teams can focus on business logic instead of boilerplate. Managing complex architectures is easy. Visual tools let you design modules, define services, and set relationships without digging through files. A built-in Explorer gives a high-level map of entities, services, and APIs. Running and debugging distributed apps is straightforward. With one click, start or stop individual services or the entire solution. Real-time views of HTTP requests, exceptions, and logs keep everything transparent. ABP Studio integrates directly with Kubernetes for microservice deployments, connect to clusters, access services by name, and intercept traffic for local code to act as if in cluster, accelerating cloud-native development and testing. ABP Studio is a complete productivity environment for the ABP platform. Download ABP Studio at abp.io/studio and build your first ABP solution in minutes.
All right. Huge thanks to folks over at ABP, Volosoft for being partners with the foundation. I'm going to bring in our next presenter, Tomas. Let me get our heads the same size. There we go. How are you today, sir?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for being having the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you, sir. You're going to talk about .vvm, again, another foundation project. And I'll be hanging out in the chat with everyone. If you have questions, I'll line them up for Tomas at the end of his session. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Thomas. I'm from Prague, Czech Republic. Currently, we have evening here. This is the last thing I'm doing before I leave my office. And I would like to show a few slides and a demo about .vvm, an open source MVVM framework for building web apps. and hopefully we will find someone who would help our team to add more features in the framework, or maybe you will find it useful if you build web apps. Then I think it's an option or a choice that you can consider. So let's start. So .vvm, as I said, it's a UI framework for building web apps, and we support both ASP.NET Core as well as old ASP.NET with .NET Framework. And we are using MVVM, model view model approach, which you probably used in WPF or Xamarin, .NET MAUI, and frameworks like that. This MVVM we have in .vvm, it's done on the client side in the browser, so the web page can be really interactive. You change something and some other part of the user interface can immediately respond to that. So it's not like Razor pages where you also have MVVM experience, but you need to make to post the form to the server and get a completely new HTML. With .vvm, everything happens on the client, and because we started more than 10 years ago, and writing JavaScript 11 years ago was quite painful, we designed the framework so you can use only C# and HTML. You don't need to learn all the JavaScript libraries, all the tools to build interactive client-side web apps. We have an extension for Visual Studio. We support even the latest insiders preview of VS 2026. And as I said, the project was started in 2014. And we will be releasing its fifth major version quite soon. The project started really long time ago, before .NET Core 1.0. So in 2016, we looked at the new version of .NET, and we wanted to get support for .NET Core as well. So that was quite shortly after the release of .NET Core. We introduced a new version of .vvm that added support for .NET Core. But since we already supported .NET Framework, we kept this support as well. So we have two NuGet packages. One is .vvm.owin, which still works with .NET Framework, and the new is .vvm.ASP.NET Core. And the framework, the syntax, everything is the same, just the integration layer is different based on which platform you use. In 2018, we saw that Blazor was released, and the goal of Blazor is basically the same as the goal of .vvm, to allow building interactive web apps without writing a single line of JavaScript. So you just use C# and HTML, and the rest of the magic happens somehow inside the framework. So we were a little bit earlier, but our goal is the same. Currently, because .vvm supports even the old .NET Framework, you can use it for two main scenarios. One of it is, of course, building new web applications with ASP.NET Core and all modern features that are present in new versions of .NET. And you can also use it to modernize old web forms apps, because you can install .vvm in a web forms project as a NuGet package. And these things can run side by side, but within the same process. So it's quite useful if you want to somehow modernize the legacy web forms app. And you want to do it in the same project. You don't need to set up YARP and have two applications and then figure out how to make single sign-on between them and how to synchronize caches and these things. So it's quite a low-risk method of doing that. The basic idea behind .vvm is that we have our own view engine. So basically, each .vvm page is just an HTML file, but we have a couple of syntax extensions. So we have our own components. It's quite similar to tag helpers from Razor. We have our data binding expressions. So this is a data binding to some property in the view model. As you can see on the right side, I have a C# class, which is a view model for my page, and you can reference this number property from the view model. And because we are in MVVM world, this data binding is a two-way. So whenever this value changes, you will see the new value updated in this component. And if the user changes the value here, it will get written back to the view model. So it's by default, it's a two-way data binding. And because there are some buttons or some other components where the user can interact with the page, so you can use this command binding to actually call methods in your view model. And of course, these methods can manipulate with the view model. They can access the values, they can write something there. So the framework will make this client-server communication, it will be handled for you, so you don't need to build API endpoints or anything like that. Basically, .vvm will make sure that the proper function will call and the proper values from the UI will appear in these properties. So if you want to try .vvm, you can open Extension Manager in Visual Studio and search for .vvm. We have an extension which will help you to start a new project. You just need to search for .vvm web application template, and that's it. It will create the project with the first page, and you can start playing with that. I have a little bit complex, a little bit more complicated, non-trivial application. First, I can show what it's doing. So I have opened the application. It's basically some configuration UI for car leasing. So I can select engine, I can select some color, I can change the number of kilometers I want to drive in 2 years for this rental, and select some options. And as you can see, this price is immediately recalculated and applied in the page. I can, when I'm happy with the selection, I can request a quote, and you can see some model dialog has opened. So that's it. It's quite simple. However, you can see that there are like two blocks in the same page which somehow interact between each other. I have some validation. For example, if I don't fill up the fields, you can see that these get highlighted. So like something like that. So let's look at the code. I have a normal, simple ASP.NET Core project. You can see the new version of the CSproj files. I'm targeting .NET 8, so I'm running on the long-term support version of .vvm. And as you can see, most of the page is just HTML with some bootstrap CSS classes. I'm not that satisfied with that because it's quite a lot of CSS classes, but it works, and most of it was written actually by Copilot, so I didn't have to write it myself. Let's start with something simpler. For example, here you can see the text box control. It's bound to some property in my view model. So number of kilometers, I have it, if I press F12, I should get to an appropriate property in the view model. It's MVVM, but because the framework handles the MVVM experience for you, you don't need to implement that iNotify property changed interface as you had to in WPF. So this is basically bound to this property. And then I have a function called calculate price, which takes all these parameters, and there is some kind of logic that will produce the final price for this rental. And there are also event handlers. So if I change the value as a user, this function would be called, so the price would get immediately recalculated. So you have a lot of components that are part of .vvm. So we have text box, we have checkboxes for these optional items. We have this selection box for the engine option. And as you can see, again, we have this data binding experience. So you can just bind it to a collection of some engine options. And each engine option, it has some ID, name, and monthly based price. And because this list never changes, we have also some attributes that can handle which properties get sent or bound in each way. So this would not have two-way data binding, it's just one-way data binding from the server to the client and things like that. And again, when I change the selection, this calculate price would function would be called to recalculate the price. Also, I have this color selection. Again, I have a collection of all possible colors. So again, a list of some objects representing each color. And because it's a little bit special component, I'm using a repeater, which is just a thing that can repeat some part of HTML for each member of this collection, something as if in Blazor you would probably write for each loop. So here we are doing it in an VVVM way. And we have radio buttons, so these will allow you to select the color of the car. So quite simple. And I tried to somehow structure the page because it has two bigger components. So I have this quote form view model, which is managing that part where I'm configuring the options for my selection. And then I have the other part for the quote dialog where I need to enter email and phone. And you have seen the validation. I'm using just the standard component model data annotations attributes to make my validation work. And the dialog itself, it's also done by an just MVVM way. So I have a Boolean property called show dialog, and I'm just binding it to this model dialog component to its open property. So whenever this is set to true, the dialog will appear. Once you set it to a false, for example, by clicking on this close button in the header, the dialog will disappear. So it's just pure MVVM experience. The great thing is that I can easily take these view models and write unit tests or integration tests for them to make sure that the price is calculated correctly. And that's very convenient. The validation is also quite extensible. For example, I'm using Bootstrap, so when something is invalid, it should get the isInvalid CSS class. So using this property, I'm instructing the framework to place this isInvalid CSS class on the element that becomes invalid. And I'm saying that this text box becomes invalid when this email property has some validation error. So once this validator.value is set, it means that the CSS class would be applied on this very HTML element. And I can also show the error message text with this CSS class invalid feedback, again for this email property. So that's how I did this validation experience, for example. So that's a short demo of .vvm. One quick tip: this model dialog component is new to .vvm 5, and basically it renders the default dialog HTML element that was added to HTML standard quite recently. So we are always trying to stick to the native HTML way of doing things. We don't try to invent our own wheels. We are trying to reuse wheels that somebody else already designed and edit in the web browsers. So that's a short demo. You can find more demos on our GitHub or on our website .vvm.com. And let me share just a couple of other ideas what we added recently in .vvm. I did some comparison because we have very similar objectives as Blazor, and we are trying to allow people write web apps without writing JavaScript. As you could see in that demo, I didn't use a single line of JavaScript. And I measured the client-side footprint, how much JavaScript or how much resources the framework needs to load so this experience would become possible. So with .vvm, we need only about like 56 kilobytes of compressed JavaScript. With Blazor Server, that is quite similar. However, in order to make Blazor Server work, the page needs to be connected to the server using the SignalR connection. So if you are on a non-stable connection, that could make some tiny issues. And with Blazor WebAssembly, of course, because the C# code runs in the browser, you need to download the .NET runtime, which was quite heavily optimized to not be big, but still it needs to download something at least on the first page load. This was just for a hello world experience. So if you are looking for something that would be that would have a very low client-side footprint, .vvm can be a way to go. When .vvm is communicating with the server, when I'm calling these functions in C# code, basically .vvm takes the view model, serialize it as JSON, and send it to the server. And there is also quite heavy optimization, so we don't serialize everything. We serialize only the things that have changed. However, all HTTP communication with the server is stateless, so you can scale the app to multiple instances, and the view model always carries the entire state the page needs to be able to work. So that's quite nice from this perspective. And in some cases, I prefer using .vvm because Blazor, both versions are great, but each one of them has some slight limitations, and in some environments it could be a little bit tricky to use. We did a couple of improvements in .vvm 5 recently. So we had server-side rendering from the first version. So if you loaded the web page and you didn't have JavaScript, you could see at least some HTML, and that's great for search engines, which are much more happy with pages where they don't need to run JavaScript to be able to ingest the page content. So in version 5, we did some optimizations and improvements, so this server-side rendering works even better. We added support for localized routes, so you can register the same page with a couple of localized route entries, and based on some part of the route, the culture would be automatically figured out by the framework. And it's still the same page. You can use resource files to localize the page. However, it will respond to multiple versions. And it will also render the meta HTML elements in the header pointing to other versions of the same page in other languages, because that's also what search engines quite appreciate. And this can happen automatically without you don't need to do anything special for that. Just provide these localized names of the or localized URLs for the pages, and the rest would be figured out by the framework. Also, front-end or public-facing websites, they usually provide search engines with sitemaps. It's an XML file that lists all the pages on the site, including all the localizations and other metadata. And because we have a route table, which basically contains information about every page in the application, we can generate this file automatically. And if it's, for example, if you imagine a blog site, there would be individual blog articles which would have the article name as part of the URL. So this mechanism of generating sitemaps is extensible, so you can write your own provider that would give this infrastructure all possible values of some route parameter. So then all the blog posts would appear in the sitemap. You just write a simple class that will provide all options for this particular route parameter. And of course, everything could be localized. So even if you have localized blog posts, you can provide these pairs. For this culture, it will be this value. For this culture, it will be this value. So these are a couple of features we added for users who use .vvm for public-facing sites. Then this framework was always designed with a line of business apps in mind. So if you are writing any admin dashboards or like applications where user need to enter a lot of data, there are complicated forms with difficult state management, a lot of grid views and these things, we have a bunch of components in .vvm that can help with making these experiences. And we did some improvements to the grid view component, which can render pageable and sortable grids. So now we support token-based paging. So instead of selecting the page number in the result set, there are some data sources which don't allow that. They will just give you the first page of records and then some kind of continuation token. And you need to use this token to be able to get the second page. And if you need the 8th page, then you need to read the previous pages and use the token to get to the next page. So we now support also this token-based paging. And also, if you want to sort by multiple columns, that wasn't that easy to do in previous versions of .vvm. And now we have it. Also, we added the like infinite scrolling, infinite paging experience. So if you scroll to the bottom of the table, we can load automatically the next page of results and continue doing so until you reach the end of your data. You have seen in the demo the new model dialog component. It's just a wrapper over the browser's dialog HTML element, but that's great because this dialog element was introduced in the standard and it was designed so it would be easily stylable by CSS. It is accessible, so it has the support of the area elements and attributes and these things. So we are just a tiny wrapper over this element, and also a lot of built-in features that are supported in this element we have also. So if you press the escape key, the dialog would close, and a lot of these things. And we have some customers who need to use very complicated components in .vvm pages, and because .vvm it's a custom framework based on the old Knockout.js, then it's not that easy to find all components, especially if you need some special charts or editors for diagrams or things like that. But there is a bunch of React or Svelte components that can do the same. And we have added an option to host Svelte components in .vvm pages. So you can use Svelte component in a .vvm page. The component can get information, can get objects from your view model, so you can very easily pass data to the component. And also the component can modify this view model. So you can just, for some part of the UI, you can use a React or Svelte component, give it access to some part of the view model, and let the component to manipulate with the view model, modify some data inside, and these things. So we have added support for Svelte in .vvm 5, and we are looking for other frameworks as well. So if you have any other JavaScript framework and you have some favorite pack of components that's present there, our integration bridge for these two frameworks is quite generic, so it shouldn't be a big issue to add support for more frameworks in the future. On Thursday, there is the third day of .NET Conf, and I will have a session there about how we replaced newtons of JSON with the new system text JSON in .vvm 5 and how it helped us. So this is the most important slide because we did a test case on a quite huge view model, 380 kilobytes. It's a view model from a real production planning application. So you can imagine a big screen with a lot of things on it. It's quite extreme. I think that the average size of view model is like order of magnitude smaller. But the serialization dropped from almost 10 milliseconds to almost 3 milliseconds with system text JSON. We didn't just change the libraries, we did a couple of other optimizations. So this doesn't mean that newtons of JSON would be bad. Just system text JSON is using newer things from the new .NET, the new primitives for manipulating with spans and memories. So it has more ways how to be efficient. However, this serialization time dropped to something like 30%. So we are very happy with that. We will do more performance tests, and this was a quite complex thing to do. So we are happy that it helped in such a significant way. And also we have a pull request which is now almost finished, and that should save about 50% of memory allocations. Because if you look in the framework how we have implemented .vvm and our own view engine, basically we build an object for every element in the HTML hierarchy. Sometimes it's just an HTML element, sometimes it's some component like a button or literal, which we use for outputting text. And each of these objects carried a dictionary of its properties, because this div element can have some classes and some other attributes, and we stored all these things in a dictionary. So every object in this control tree had its own dictionary. We found out that most objects have only very small number of properties, like 2 or 3 or something like that. So we built our own structure that can hold up to 8 properties without allocating that much data in memory, and this is how it helped us to reduce the number of memory allocations. So on most pages we experience something like 50% of saving in terms of number of objects allocated, which is great, because garbage collection, the speed of garbage collection scales quite closely to the number of objects the garbage collector needs to track. So that's also one of the improvements I'm quite enthusiastic about. As I mentioned at the beginning, you can use .vvm to modernize old web forms apps, because you can just install .vvm NuGet package in the web forms app, and you can start replacing web forms pages with .vvm pages, and you can do it just one by one. So you can do one page every day, one page every week, something like that. Everything would still work. It would be still the one .NET Framework project. You will deploy it the same way as you used to do before. And you can keep most of the business logic untouched, because like it's still the same framework, same libraries, same things. And after you get rid of all dependencies on system.web and HTTP context and this API that is unsupported, you can then switch the target framework to .NET 8, because .vvm is the same. The main part of the framework is the same on both old .NET framework and the new .NET. So this can be quite a low-risk, slow, incremental method of modernizing old web applications. If you tried the side-by-side modernization with using YARP, you can probably confirm that it's quite difficult to get it started, because you have two applications and you need to synchronize session, you need to handle single sign-on. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I have done a couple of applications using this way. However, the beginning was quite painful, and also there was something that the old application just hold in memory, and it's not accessible to the other applications, some kind of caching. You need some distributed cache to be able to share this information between two applications. So I was fascinating while using .vvm for the modernization, that it can be so easy, because you still run within a single process. You have everything at your disposal the same way as you had in web forms, and you can do quite small incremental changes to go towards the new version of .NET. So basically that's it. We are looking for contributors. So if you want to get your hands dirty, we have a couple of interesting challenges that we would like to improve in our framework. We have support in Visual Studio. It's quite a large extension for Visual Studio that implements support for our own view engine. However, we would like to re-implement this to use Language Server Protocol, so we could have this extension available also for VS Code and for Rider. So if you are looking to write complex algorithms with manipulating with syntax trees and these things, just ping us. We would be really happy to get like some support with that, because our team capacity is quite limited and we want to do that, but we know that it would take us quite a long time. Also, for the modernization use case, we have a converter from web forms to .vvm, but it's quite just a bunch of like static analysis rules, so it doesn't work that well. It helps only with small, easy, simple transformations. But we were thinking about using AI to make this conversion process, to move it to the next level, because AI could understand what you are doing in the code behind and would somehow be able to figure out how the corresponding view model should look like to achieve the same functionality. And if you want to help any open source project, not just us, it doesn't need to be just that like you would write a pull request. Also, if you create samples, if you help writing some documentations or making videos about how you use this framework, what is your experience with that, all these things can help the open source contributors quite significantly, because we are building the framework. We don't have much time to do marketing or videos or things like that. So any help, even in this side, would be greatly appreciated. And I think that all other maintainers of other open source projects, they would agree with that this could be extremely helpful. So if you're looking for something that you can be proud of to show in your CV that you helped some open source projects, this could be a great way. If you have any questions or thoughts, just I will be here, so you can engage with me in comments. And here are a couple of links. We have main website, documentation, and a list of samples with links to GitHub repos where you could get the code. So I hope that you find that very interesting. And if you try it, please share your experience with me or with other people from the team. We would be really happy to get any feedback.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it a bunch. If you have questions out there, please feel free to drop them in the chat. One question that came in much earlier was, is there any concern if I'm doing cross-platform? So if I'm on Linux, do I have any concerns there?
I think not, because one of the core contributors, co-maintainers of .vvm, he is running on Linux. He is developing .vvm on Linux, so naturally this should work. Of course, the .NET framework version is Windows only, but .vvm.ASP.NET Core package, it supports .NET 8 and newer, so it should run on Linux without any issues. We have quite a lot of .vvm applications running in containers in Kubernetes, so I can confirm it works.
Oh, awesome. Well, there you go. All right. A couple thank yous coming in. Sadly, I don't have translate turned on for a couple of these messages, so I'm not actually sure what some of the messages are saying. They're in Spanish, and StreamYard does not translate. So apologies for that. All right. Well, Thomas, I will let you have your day back. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. And everyone else, go look up .vvm. We're proud to have them in the .NET Foundation. And yeah, if you're looking for that first project, I loved you had the slide. I didn't even have to ask the question. So there's always opportunity. But Thomas, I'll leave you to it. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thanks. See you.
Take care. All right, everybody. So we have one more session left, but we're going to play a sponsor segment. This is going to be from our friends over at JetBrains, which I'm sure I don't need to introduce because everyone's heard of JetBrains. They're going to talk a little bit about their platform and some of the things that they have come down the line. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this message from JetBrains.
Hi everyone, I'm Mehul from JetBrains. We're happy to support the .NET Foundation Summit and the .NET community. Our goal is pretty simple: help .NET developers be more productive, whether they're building open source projects, learning, or shipping apps at work. We make Writer available for non-commercial and learning scenarios. We have programs for students, educators, and early stage teams. and we're bringing our inspections and AI to VS Code through our extensions. Today, I'll show a few highlights from our .NET Days keynote, Writer, ReSharper, and how we're adding AI to everyday .NET development. Let's dive in. We'll set the stage with a quick look at what our teams at JetBrains have been working on for .NET, how the tools support your day-to-day, and a bit of what's next.
Yeah, JetBrains has been around for 25 years and working in the .NET ecosystem for most of that. ReSharper was released way back in 2004, and we've been consistently getting feedback that it and other products powered by ReSharper have been helping the community learn .NET ever since. We've got no intention of slowing down, even as the landscape of development is changing around us. So let's take a look at where we are and how we can support you in the .NET ecosystem.
And Writer continues to be one of the most loved IDE experiences in the .NET world. And I want to talk about a story that we've been working on with Syncfusion. They have a SaaS product called Bullsign, and when the team adopted Writer, including the other JetBrains .NET tools in .Ultimate, they found faster builds, smooth debugging, and quality that scales when the pace picks up. So I encourage you to go to the URL on this slide here at the bottom right and read more about exactly how that team, using a web SaaS product, were able to scale with Writer.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things that Writer has been up to lately. We're very pleased to bring Junie to Writer. It's not installed by default, but you can easily get it from the Marketplace settings page. Once installed, it will add a new tool window ready to accept a prompt for a task to implement. Before starting, it's worth setting up some project-specific guidelines that Junie will use while working, and Junie provides a prompt to generate a good baseline for you to customize further. I've already got some set up for this project, so let's try a prompt for some new functionality to add a discount filter to the eShop sample app. We can extend the tool window to see Junie in action. It will create a plan for how to implement the new feature and work through that plan step by step. It will look at your existing code, make changes, and can also build the project and run tests to verify things. Let's skip forward, and you can see that Junie has made a number of changes to add the discount details to various files, including our Razor pages and the database migration. We can look at another example. Junie understands the context of the project and therefore knows that this is a Unity game. It uses this to know how to implement double jump, a term well known in platform gaming. It also knows that the player controller is responsible for moving the character and can make the necessary changes to this file. We can verify everything works by switching to Unity and playing the game. Of course, there's a lot more to Writer than AI features, and Writer has a lot of ways to help you with .NET development, such as the Services tool window. This gives you a view of all the services related to your solution. You can connect to the local or remote Docker daemon and see and control all of the images and containers that you're using. It's also a great way to work with .NET Aspire, giving you a dashboard in the IDE to start and stop your Aspire hosts. You can see all of the different instances, if they're running or not, current health, and console output. Writer also has great integration with OpenTelemetry and will collect logs from all of your services. It will list the services and instances, show all of the log entries, metrics from performance counters, and trace information. You can even generate a service map based on the trace information, giving you a really helpful visual representation of the dependencies between your services. So that's Writer today. Practical speedups you notice in your loop, Junie to accelerate deliberate edits and tests, and modern web and cloud-friendly paths so you spend more time in the code and less time hopping between tools.
And we've got lots more planned. We'll continue working on performance and responsiveness. We're looking specifically at warm startup scenarios, reopening projects that you frequently use, and we've already completed some work, for example, on improving the time taken by Roslyn analyzers in your projects, all to make sure that Rider feels snappier and more responsive to use.
And we're working on lots of other great features to make your development lives better too. Timely support for .NET 10. We're aiming for the same day support, just like we did with .NET 9, and improvements to OpenTelemetry support, because everyone needs to understand what their project is doing. And in fact, if you haven't already checked out the OpenTelemetry support in the current version, you should take a look. It's really helpful stuff. Now, ReSharper.
For folks who live in Visual Studio, the current ReSharper builds can now run out of process, which helps the editor stay responsive, especially on big solutions where every pause breaks your rhythm. This has been a major investment for us, so it's very exciting to be able to use it day to day, and we're getting great feedback from you all that's telling us that moving the main ReSharper engine into its own process has been worth the wait. Looking ahead, we're aligned with the next Visual Studio as well. ReSharper supports Visual Studio 2026 today, and we'll be there on day one when VS 2026 ships, so you can keep using your refactorings, inspections, and navigation without changing how you work. Now, let's take a quick pass in VS 2026 so you can get a preview.
All right, folks, I'm going to take you on a trip through some great ReSharper news, followed by my 9 ReSharper features that every .NET developer should know about. So have fun. ReSharper is ready for the new Visual Studio 2026, and our out-of-process architecture is becoming ready for ReSharper. There are still some limitations like debugger, profiler, and AI bits, but if you want a smoother typing experience with startup UI freezes cut down up to 61%, you should really give it a try and enable it from the status bar or ReSharper menu. Navigation in ReSharper is not just about a single shortcut and wildcard text search on different elements. The initial letter search helps you to avoid typing out long parts of a search element by using camel humps. Typing a dot gives you a quick look at the type's members. All results are shown in a clean, highlighted and compact way. It even works a bit fuzzy. For example, tuple names is shown when you search for NT instead of TN. This allows you to find what you're looking for, even if your input isn't exact, whether it's a typo or a fuzzy memory. Rearranging code is common practice, but cut and paste is a provisional solution that often requires manual fixes. ReSharper lets you move code at the structural level, preserving logic and context. For example, you can reorder statements naturally, even across multiple lines. The greedy brace feature on compound statements like if or using statements is another way to quickly adjust block scopes. I use move left and move right mainly to reorder expression operands, collection elements, or parameters and arguments. And fun fact, during live demos I never get the shortcut right. And one more tip, you can also troubleshoot your formatting with ease. Visual Studio's context menu in the Solution Explorer is kind of bloated, but if you look close enough or hit Ctrl-Shift-R, you can find some really beneficial large-scale refactorings that save you plenty of time. Who wants to deal with file creation during prototyping, or wants to adjust all those namespaces when you move files around? Right, ReSharper wants to do that for you. And by the way, you should really check out the recently introduced Convert Usings to Global refactoring with its great interface to make well-informed decisions. I hope you learned some new productivity tricks to get more out of ReSharper in Visual Studio 2026.
Now, it's not a secret that some of you use VS Code as well as Rider and ReSharper. So we've released 2 extensions to bring JetBrains code intelligence into VS Code and VS Code-based editors. Once installed, you just need to open a folder that contains a solution file, and ReSharper will load the solution and be ready to work. By default, you'll see a view of your folders like you do normally with Visual Studio Code, but ReSharper adds a solution explorer. So you get to see all the folders, solution items, and projects that you've got in your solution. The AI Assistant extension for Visual Studio Code is also available in the marketplace and is also in public preview. It makes a great complement to ReSharper for Visual Studio Code. For example, it integrates with a quick fix menu to allow you to generate documentation for methods or classes. You can right-click on code and find more actions in the JetBrains AI Assistant context menu, and also in the command palette. And of course, it supports code completion, so you can quickly generate the code you need. It is also helpful for generating commit messages, taking away some of that boilerplate for you. And of course, there is the chat window, where you can choose between different top-tier models, such as GPT-5 and Claude Sonnet 4.5. You can also add context and choose between modes: lightweight chat mode, where you can ask questions about your code base or public APIs, edit mode for lightweight multi-file edits and refactorings, and then agent mode for working on more complex tasks, where it can break the task down for you and run through it step by step.
AI is having a big impact on the industry right now and the world. It's hard to get through a sentence without those two letters cropping up, let alone a presentation. It's definitely changing the way we work, from AI assistants to agentic workflows. Writer and ReSharper Engine have a deep knowledge of your code, and we can make that available to AI models, which is a benefit because it gives access to the indexes that we build, the deterministic refactorings in the IDE, and much more.
Yeah, all of this is covered by the JetBrains AI subscription, and the AI Pro level is included with the .Ultimate and all product packs subscriptions. If you're going to be doing agentic workflows, which of course consume more credits, there's also the AI Ultimate level, and top-up credits are available. The subscription doesn't tie you to a single model, and we've just introduced support for the latest models from leading providers, including Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 4.5 and OpenAI GPT-5. In fact, we've also just released an AI assistant update that includes Claude Agent, an advanced AI coding agent based on the Anthropic Agent SDK, which powers Claude Code. So you now have the choice of using Junie or Claude as your coding agent. If we can choose between different AI models, why not also different AI agents, all as part of one subscription? Let's take a look. You're probably already familiar with the AI actions that are available with AI Assistant. For example, being able to generate documentation for methods and classes. I find it particularly useful to be able to push this boilerplate to the AI for me so that I can concentrate more on the code itself. But AI Assistant is being continuously updated, and we're getting new features. For example, we recently released Next Edit Suggestions, which is a way for the AI Assistant to be able to suggest code modifications as you type. During the beta, it's not enabled by default, but you can quickly go into settings and switch it on. We'll have it enabled by default very soon. When enabled, AI Assistant will watch your typing and will look for similar changes. If it sees that you're making similar edits across the file, it will start to then suggest them for you. And you can hit Tab to review the changes and very quickly accept them. And a very quick way of making repetitive changes across your code base. While we're inside the settings, it's worth pointing out a few other things that are useful. For example, AI Assistant supports MCP, the Model Context Protocol, a great open standard for how to add extra functions and abilities, external data, external tools into the AI Assistant itself. And the chat window itself has been updated. We've done lots more work on additional context. There's lots of context that can be added automatically when code-based mode is enabled, but you can also choose the context that you want. For example, we've just created a rules file. We can pick one of those based on the number of different rule files we've got added in our project, or we can add files and folders, or symbols, and you can type to search to find particular classes that you want to add. And we've also got the ability to add commits, the project structure, and also images if the model supports it. This is a great way of prototyping, and you can provide a wireframe to the AI so that it can build something to your specification. Used well, AI accelerates your judgment. You decide, it drafts.
And because it's built into Writer, it shows up exactly when you need it without breaking your flow. All right, now a quick note for students, open source contributors, and folks building personal projects. We continue to make many JetBrains tools available for the community when the work is not commercial. So think learning, teaching, open source, research, or hobby builds. And for commercial teams or when you're working on commercial projects, the straightforward path is .ultimate. Rider, ReSharper, and the rest of the .NET toolset from JetBrains in one bundle that includes JetBrains AI Pro as part of the same subscription. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the .NET Foundation for everything it does to support the developer ecosystem. If you'd like to learn more or try our .NET tools, visit jetbrains.com/.net or check out our free non-commercial licenses for open source projects. On behalf of everyone at JetBrains, thank you for being a part of this community and helping make .NET stronger every year.
All right. Thank you, JetBrains, for being a partner of ours. We are going to move on now to our last presenter. So we had a little bit of just a scheduling snafu with Sean Walker. So he did submit a video of his presentation. So I'm going to play that for all y'all. And if you have any questions, Sean won't be able to answer them live, but we'll make sure that those messages get to Sean and they can be answered. So give me one moment and we'll queue up the Sean video. All right. So this is Sean Walker. Sean is the maintainer of Octane, a .NET-based CMS. And he's going to talk a little bit about the platform and show you some demos.
All right, let's get started. Excited to be at the .NET Foundation Summit again. This is the third time that I've presented at the .NET Foundation Summit. The summit is a great opportunity for open source maintainers of .NET projects to be able to showcase their work to the broader .NET community. Today, I am going to show you Octane, which is a CMS and application framework for Blazor and .NET MAUI. I'm Sean Walker. I guess my claim to fame is that I was the original creator of .NET Nuke, which was an open source content management system and framework that was based on web forms. It was originally released way back in late 2002, early 2003. That open source project is still around today. A lot of folks still use it for powering their websites or their web applications. But over time, the technology platform there has started to age a bit. And so that's why I created a newer open source project called Octane, which is based on modern .NET technology and has some of the same kind of capabilities that .NET Nuke had. I've been fortunate enough to be a Microsoft MVP for, I think it's 17 years now. So it's been a huge portion of my career, and it's always a great honor to be a Microsoft MVP. I'm also an ASP Insider, and I've also been a volunteer with the .NET Foundation since it started in 2014. For the last 5 years, I've been contributing to the project committee. The project committee reviews applications for .NET open source projects so that they can become members of the .NET Foundation. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Blazor today, and I thought that it might be useful to do a little walk down memory lane when it comes to Microsoft technology stacks, just to remind everyone sort of how Blazor fits into the bigger picture. So if we look at .NET Web UI and the frameworks that Microsoft has provided over time, we can go all the way back to the year 2000. And that was the year, obviously, that the .NET Framework 1.0 was released. And part of .NET Framework was a UI framework called ASP.NET Web Forms. ASP.NET Web Forms was a component-based UI framework, which was very popular and very powerful. And it had a whole ecosystem of third-party vendors that created components for it. It was very powerful technology for building websites and for building web applications. And it is, it's had a very long run now. It's been around for 25 years. It is still fully supported by Microsoft, but for the last 10 years, it hasn't really been evolving or being enhanced. It's sort of been in maintenance mode as Microsoft moved to other UI frameworks since then and for their investments. In 2007, Microsoft introduced Silverlight, which was a rich UI framework, which was their competitive offering to other options such as Flash or Flex that were available at that time. A lot of applications were built using these types of technologies, but I guess it was around 2010 or 2011 that the device manufacturers such as Apple basically decided that they sort of did not like the characteristics of these types of applications on how they ran on their devices. They claimed that there might be security issues or performance issues that they would create. And so because of that, they kind of limited their ability to work on those devices. And as a result of that, it kind of was the end of these frameworks like Silverlight. And so people who had built Silverlight applications could continue on for a period of time, but really they had to migrate to other technology options at that point. And that one sort of was end of lifed. In 2009, Microsoft announced ASP.NET MVC. Again, this was sort of in response to developer trends in the industry. Ruby on Rails had emerged as a very popular option using the MVC approach for developing server-side applications. So Microsoft introduced ASP.NET MVC, and using a lot of the more modern techniques for software development at that time. And MVC is still around today and is still widely used for building server-based applications. Often it is paired with maybe a JavaScript UI front end, and MVC could be used on the back end, although MVC is, of course, perfectly capable of building UI as well. Over time, the MVC framework became quite large and powerful and complex. And so in 2017, Microsoft introduced Razor Pages as an alternative for basically simplifying the development approach for building applications. It was still a server-side model, but it was much more simple than the MVC approach. And that approach is still around and supported as well today. In 2018, Microsoft released Blazor as a new UI framework that was based on component-based concepts, whereas like the previous ones, Razor Pages and ASP.NET MVC were really did not have a rich component model to them. Blazor did, and so if you look at the sort of graph here, Blazor's been around for 7 or 8 years now. So a lot of great investments have gone into that framework, and during that time, it has become very feature-rich and mature. So it's a great UI framework, and I think it was around 2023, maybe .NET 8, that Microsoft basically made an announcement that all of the future investments around UI frameworks were going to go into Blazor, that it would become the sort of the official UI framework going forward for the future investments. And that was because Blazor is super versatile, right? It can be used to build web applications, it can be used to build desktop applications and mobile applications. So you got a lot of flexibility there. And so because of that, it seemed like it was sort of the winner when it came to UI frameworks for building applications in the future. We looked at the Blazor roadmap for a moment. As I mentioned, it's been around for 7 or 8 years. It was originally introduced in 2018, and at that time it was given sort of an experimental label, meaning that Microsoft was kind of working on it internally as a sort of a proof of concept. And they were trying to determine whether or not it was something that could be built into something that was more robust, that could be a go-to UI framework for developers in the .NET space. By late 2019, they made the decision that yes, it was very capable and could satisfy the needs of .NET developers, and they rolled it into .NET Core 3.1, I believe, at that time. And so then it became an official UI framework that was being offered by Microsoft. The first version of Blazor in 2020 that was introduced used the Blazor server hosting model. Blazor server utilizes WebSockets or like SignalR under the covers for doing communication between the client application and the server. It was a very powerful model, still widely used today. Microsoft followed that up with Blazor WebAssembly, and WebAssembly is based on the international sort of standard around like WebAssembly technology that has emerged in the industry. So this is Microsoft's implementation of it, and it really allows .NET assemblies to be transferred to the browser and then run natively within the browser. And this, obviously, all of the main modern browsers all support it. And so it's a very powerful option if you want to run native applications in the browser. A few years after that, Microsoft introduced Blazor Hybrid. Essentially, Blazor Hybrid is an approach to extending the technology to run on mobile and desktop, and that is done by using a web view component, which can be embedded in a desktop or mobile application. And then within that web view, your Razor components can be rendered, and they're rendered natively on the device. And those web components, or sorry, those Razor components that are Blazor components, in fact, the same component that works in a web context can run in either desktop or mobile, as long as you build them in a sort of client-server architecture type approach. And then the next major advancement in Blazor was in .NET 8, which was in late 2023, and that was when Microsoft introduced static Blazor, sometimes referred to as static server-side rendering. And essentially, with this capability, it covered the more sort of server-side workload of if you were maybe wanting to create a website and you had static web pages, you could use Blazor Razor components to build static applications and static websites at that point. And so with all these different capabilities, it's, like I said, a very robust and versatile technology that can be used for almost anything. Underpinning Blazor is the Razor component model. And Razor components have like sort of a full featured set of capabilities that you would imagine that any sort of component technology would have. The components themselves have UI markup, which would be a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then those are paired usually with a C# class where you would write, the functionality of your component in C#. The C# class can also provide access to lifecycle events that you can hook into to take advantage of various aspects of the component lifecycle. There's property bindings that you can very easily reference, UI elements from your C# code in the UI markup. And then there's events that can be raised as well. For example, if someone clicks a button or takes sort of interactive steps on the UI, those events can be captured within your C# code, and then you can take action on them. So very powerful component model. And this component model is consistent across all of the different render modes. So it makes it very powerful for creating components that can be used in many different devices and contexts. I already mentioned a bit about this, but the Blazor hosting models, you have Blazor Server. And Blazor Server, basically the components run on the server. But the interactivity when the components are rendered in the browser is done using WebSockets or using basically SignalR to transfer both the events back and forth between the browser and the server, and also the UI fragments that need to be rendered. And so that's a very powerful approach. It's great for internal applications, and it's very, very responsive. And then you have Blazor WebAssembly, and Blazor WebAssembly uses the WebAssembly standard, and it allows you to transfer your .NET assemblies to the browser where they'll run natively in the browser itself. And then Blazor Hybrid, using the WebView component, which can be embedded in desktop or mobile applications and allows you to run Blazor components natively on various devices. And so, as I mentioned, with the combination of these different capabilities, you can target different types of workloads or scenarios or different devices. So if you want to, build a mobile application using Blazor, you would use the Blazor hybrid approach. If you want to build a web application, you can use Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, or the static server-side Blazor approach that was introduced in .NET 8. And if you want to build a desktop application, again, you can use Blazor Hybrid with the WebView concept. And so, and the cool thing is that you could actually build sort of one set of Blazor components that could run on all of these different devices, as long as you architect your application appropriately in a client-server manner. All right, so all of that background related to Blazor, now I'm going to move on to talking about Octane. So Octane is a content management system and application framework that was built from the ground up to take advantage of the capabilities of Blazor and .NET MAUI. The tagline for Octane is build applications, not infrastructure. And what I mean by that are a lot of modern architectures tend to use a very distributed approach where there's many different aspects of the application that taking advantage of different types of infrastructure. In a lot of cases, that is way more complex than it needs to be. A lot of business problems need to be solved or can be solved in a much more simple manner, where you can build an application that uses far less infrastructure, costs a lot less to run, and is a lot easier to maintain. And so that's the approach that Octane takes. Sometimes people refer to these types of applications as modular monoliths, or there's a lot of different terminology that's used, but essentially it's trying to solve the problem of building applications in a much more simple manner. And so one of the pet peeves that I had about .NET and .NET Core and kind of the newer .NET capabilities is that the examples that are provided by Microsoft, for example, like the Blazor template, when you spin up a new application using Blazor, the capabilities that it kind of offers to the developer in terms of coming up to speed and learning are very limited, right? It offers like a few simple components where you can see some interactivity, but there's like no data access, there's no services, there's like nothing that resembles a real software application. And so that makes it difficult for developers when they're trying to learn a new technology like Blazor. And so what I wanted to do with Octane is provide an open source application that actually has a lot of the capabilities that you would need to use in a real world application, right? Like basically a way or patterns that you could follow for data access, patterns you can follow for building services, and how Blazor interacts with all of those things. So there's a lot of great examples that are included in Octane, and so that was one of the main requirements that I had when building it. Octane is an application framework, which means that it's designed to accelerate the development of applications. So it provides a lot of building blocks that you can take advantage of so that you can focus on solving your specific business problem, as opposed to building plumbing or foundational things that probably every application requires, but you shouldn't be building every time from scratch. So that automation and reduction of overhead can really accelerate your development efforts, where you can focus your time on the things that matter. Code reusability is super important, especially when it comes to component models. So you can build components once and then reuse them throughout your application, as opposed to having to rebuild functionality in various areas of your application. So I'm a real big proponent of code reusability. That was also a big factor in .NET Nuke and the web forms model. So allowing basically to build reusable components that you can reuse throughout your application, and then taking it even beyond that so that people can build reusable basically applications that you can embed within your own application. In Octane and in .NET, and we call these modules. And a module is essentially can be made up of many different Razor components to satisfy or basically deliver on a very specific business problem. Like, for example, if I wanted to build a blog module, right? So all of the functionality that a blog contains can be wrapped up into a module. It can be packaged in a NuGet package. It can be made available to other developers, and they can consume that into their application very simply, and then have a full-featured blog within their Blazor application. So that's what I mean by code reusability. Modular applications, like I said, they're like building blocks, but the idea with making things modular is that the various aspects of the application can be developed, they can be debugged, and they can be deployed independently from one another. So they're not all sort of commingled together. And then at runtime, they're actually dynamically instantiated and then rendered into the UI based on configuration that the application maintains for you. And some people might say, oh, well, the default Blazor approach also is modular, but because it uses components, and that's true to some extent, but in the standard Blazor application model, when it comes to deployment, you always need to deploy your entire application, even if you've modified only like one minor part of it. And so that can be a limitation because applications can become quite large, and having to deploy the entire application isn't always the most efficient thing to do. And so with Octane, we wanted to solve that problem. And so modules are broken down into smaller components that are maintained independently from the framework itself. And so if you make a change to a module, you can deploy only that module without having to deploy the actual framework itself or any of the other modules that are part of it. So that's a very powerful model. And then obviously performance is a huge factor in software applications. And I guess the really cool thing is that .NET Core has always focused on performance ever since it was initially introduced. And I think in every new version of .NET Core that has been released, there's been a continuous focus from Microsoft on performance. And so you'd find that, like, for example, .NET 6 was highly performant, but then they came out with new enhancements in .NET 7 to even push it further, and .NET 8 was, even more powerful. And so Octane gets the benefit of all of these performance benefits, but also focuses on performance itself to ensure that all of the workloads that run within the Octane application are also highly performant. And Blazor plays a key role in that, because the Blazor UI component model is basically a single page application model, which allows you to emulate like desktop or that type of almost like desktop UI interactivity within a web application. So no full page refreshes, like things are very responsive, and end users get the benefit. The Octane framework, like I said earlier, it accelerates your development effort by giving you a really robust foundation and platform to build on, where you can focus on your specific business problems. And it gives you a lot of building blocks, so services that are common in every application that are already wired up for you and are really easy to use, and also integrated with a pretty powerful dashboard, so that you don't have to build any of that yourself. It's an open source project offered under standard open source license. That's the MIT license, which is a very permissive open source license. And in fact, the Octane framework is copyright by the .NET Foundation. It's a .NET Foundation project, so it's managed within the .NET Foundation itself. And I mean, ever since the beginning, it is pioneering the adoption of .NET Core, Blazor, and .NET MAUI. From an architecture perspective, Octane is a client-server application. If we focus on the bottom of this diagram first, we can see that it's running on using .NET Core and EF Core as its sort of main technologies from the Microsoft stack that it depends on. Octane has its own repository layer, which is used to interact with the database, because it of course does require a database for storing configuration. It has a robust headless API layer as well. And because it is a client server application, it needs to have an API. That API is also paired with Swagger for testing and other benefits. Octane also has the ability to host scheduled jobs on the server. It uses the .NET Core I hosted service interface, so that those jobs basically can run within the context of an app service or a website. And again, by using this approach, it requires less infrastructure, which was one of the overall benefits of Octane, right? Build applications, not infrastructure. And then you, of course, can have your module, your independent module APIs also on the server. On the client side, it uses Blazor, and that supports Blazor Server, Blazor WebAssembly, and Blazor Hybrid. And in fact, it also supports server or static server-side Blazor. So all of the different flavors of Blazor are supported. It has a service layer, which are basically wrappers which allow you to call the APIs on the server much more simply. It has a composable component UI, meaning that you can define as many pages as you want in your site using configuration. And then the various modules that are part of those pages are also part of the configuration. And at runtime, it'll compose the page for you dynamically based on what your configuration says. It is multi-tenant, meaning once you have an installation of Octane, you can have multiple sites that are running in that installation. And each site can have its own set of users, its own set of security roles, its own files, its own content. And so it can be separated. Each site can have its own dedicated database as well. And so a lot of capabilities there. And then on the UI, also on the client side, you also have the module UIs, which are the Razor components that would be used to build modules. And with this whole sort of combination, of course, you can target many different types of devices. The multi-tenant configuration is pretty powerful. So .NET Nuke, when I created it, one of its huge capabilities that people took advantage of was multi-tenancy. .NET Nuke only really supported one type of multi-tenancy, and that was the shared model, where you would have an application running, and you could spin up various sites that were part of the installation, but all of the data would be stored in a single shared database. In Octane, we've taken this a step further, and so we actually have sort of these three different multi-tenant configurations. On the left side, you've got dedicated tenancy, which is really not multi-tenant. That's where you install the application for a single client, and you have its own dedicated database. On the far right-hand side, you've got the shared model, which I just described, which .NET Nuke supported, but also Octane supports, meaning if you want to have the data for various clients all shared in the same database to kind of reduce cost or make your infrastructure a bit more simple, you can do that. But we also have this model in the middle, where you can have an installation of Octane, which is shared across multiple clients, but each client has their own isolated database. This is important when it comes to certain environments where there's regulatory concerns around data, where you have to keep things separated. It also has other benefits in terms of portability. If you want to move one client's data from one environment to another, it's all self-contained in its own isolated database. So there is a lot of capabilities here around the multi-tenant configuration for Octane. And really multi-tenancy is one of the huge features of Octane, because Microsoft doesn't really provide any multi-tenant capabilities as part of their own frameworks that they provide. So you do have to either build your own, or you have to take advantage of multi-tenant capabilities that are in other frameworks like Octane. Octane also has multiple database support, and this was important because obviously .NET Core is a cross-platform technology. And so on various platforms, there are different databases which are, more preferred or more popular than others. Like, for example, on Windows, a lot of .NET developers use Microsoft SQL Server. That's been the case for a long time. But on Linux or other non-Windows environments, developers like to use other databases such as MySQL, Postgres. These are all very capable relational databases, and so it was important that Octane could function appropriately in all these different environments. And SQLite is a great option for quickly spinning up a database in a development environment, and Octane supports that as well. From a security perspective, Octane has quite a lot of capabilities in this area as well. For anyone who's had to build, a .NET or Blazor application from scratch, wiring up the security can be quite confusing at times. I think over time, Microsoft's tried to make this a bit easier by including, some self-hosted authentication capabilities in the .NET Identity library. Like the initial versions of Blazor didn't have that, and so there was really limited options which developers had, and so Octane stepped in to try and fill that void with a solution. And even in today's version of Blazor, where there is some .NET Identity scaffolding that can be done, the capabilities that Octane provides are far more advanced than what Microsoft provides out of the box. So you probably heard of the back-end for front-end model. Essentially, for quite a number of years, the industry moved towards using like JOT tokens for everything when it came to authentication. But in probably the last 3 or 4 years, there's quite a number of limitations that have been identified related to JOT tokens, and the industry has kind of moved back towards cookies for web applications, because cookies just have naturally better aspects when it comes to security. And instead of referring to it as cookies, usually they'll refer to it as backend for front-end security architecture. So Octane has the ability to have self-hosted authentication, and that is using the .NET Identity library, right, where the data itself is stored within the database, and there's like an ASP.NET user table, and the standard .NET Identity capabilities. Octane has its own user interface of components that were developed against that library, which kind of offer additional capabilities over and beyond what Microsoft provides in its own UI. Octane also has the ability to interact with third-party identity providers. So maybe something like Microsoft Entra, or basically any third party that offers the integration capability as an identity provider can be configured in Octane. And so users can log in using the identity provider. That is then transferred into a cookie, and that works really well for managing the needs of users in your application. Octane also supports both external clients using JOT tokens and remote APIs using JOT tokens. So it's got quite a robust security model to basically satisfy almost any scenario that you might run into. It has a composable component UI. And so I kind of described this earlier, where when you're building things in Octane, you're not building like physical hard-coded kind of page components. Everything is basically configuration. So everything is virtual, and that allows you to create kind of an unlimited number of pages in your site just using configuration, and those pages can contain an unlimited amount of content in various configurations. And the really powerful thing with the composable component UI is, if you need to make a content change to one particular page, you can actually make that kind of a change just by altering the configuration, as opposed to having to physically change code and do a full deployment of the application. So it can be quite efficient from that perspective. Modules in Octane follow the same exact architecture that the framework itself, the Octane framework itself, follows. So it's broken down into basically 3 projects. There's a server project, which handles the data access and repositories, the APIs. It has a shared project, which contains the models, and then it has a client project, which is where your Razor components reside, and your client services, which interact with the APIs. And all 3 of these projects then are compiled into their own assemblies, and they're packaged into a NuGet package, which allows them to be installed into your Octane framework instance, or even someone else's Octane framework instance, because the idea behind modules is they can be shared and they're very portable. Octane is fully localized. So the UI was built in such a way that you can localize the text of the various aspects of the UI into different languages. And there is a whole community of folks that are using Octane that have created localizations. We call them translations. And they follow the same sort of a modular approach, meaning a full translation for a language, for example, maybe in French, is packaged up as a NuGet package that you can consume into your installation, and it'll install all of the like satellite assemblies that are needed. And then you just have to, within the UI, choose that you're using that particular language, and all of the labels within the application will dynamically transform into that other language. So localization was a key capability that was part of .NET Nuke as well, in terms of pulling in the international community so that the software could be used in many, many different regions around the world. But I mean, not just English-speaking regions, but non-English speaking regions as well. And so it was important that Octane contains that capability as well. The open source project, the open source project was started in 2020, so it's been around 5 years now. Very happy to say that there's been a lot of participation in the open source project. We've had about 57 or more contributors during that time, so people contributing code to the project. We've got a decent number of stars, 7,280 commits at this point in time. That's like fairly significant amount of work that's gone into this project, and 3,266 pull requests. So the .NET Foundation tracks like sort of the monthly activity of open source projects that are part of the foundation, and keeps track of kind of these different metrics. And often Octane is one of the, well, usually it's in the top 5 of most active projects within the .NET Foundation, and that just kind of speaks to how much actual work and investment is going into this product to improve it over time. Octane also has a marketplace, and so like I mentioned earlier about the fact that modules can be packaged as NuGet packages and made available to others. That can be done in a open source scenario, but it can also be for commercial purposes, right? So there are people who are building commercial modules and themes for Octane, and all of those extensions are made available through the Octane marketplace, which is at www.octane.net. And so it's really simple for a third-party developer to create a module or a theme, and then they can register it in the Octane marketplace, and they can specify whether it's open source or commercial. If it's commercial, Octane also provides a kind of a integrated licensing capability as well that developers can take advantage of instead of having to like kind of roll their own licensing solution. And on the back end, the e-commerce for the marketplace is handled using Stripe, so using like an industry kind of standard e-commerce approach. And so, yeah, that provides a lot of capabilities for users of the platform to get additional functionality without having to build it themselves, right? They can leverage things that are already built. And so, like I mentioned, Octane has a lot of capabilities, right? It's multi-tenant, it's multi-language, it can support multiple devices. It supports multiple types of authentication, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. And it's cross-platform because it's built on .NET Core. It also supports multiple integrated development environments. So you can, develop with Visual Studio, you can develop with VS Code, you can develop with Cursor, you can develop with Rider. It's not tied to one specific IDE. It's extensible. So basically every feature that's built for Octane is extensible, meaning that it's expected, that developers will need to customize the application, and so there needs to be extension points that they can take advantage of so that they don't have to modify the core framework itself. Because that's the whole idea here is with a framework, as long as you don't alter the framework, right, you can upgrade the framework to newer versions to take advantage of new features without affecting your custom code that you've built, because your custom code is developed separately from the framework itself, just like Blazor. And so that's the approach that Octane takes. As I mentioned, it supports multiple databases. So it supports SQL Server, SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres. And it also supports all of the different Blazor render modes and hosting models that are available today, meaning it can support static Blazor, which is really powerful if you're building a website, or it can support interactive Blazor if you're building a web application. And on the interactivity side, it can support Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. And then it also allows you to use the components that you write in .NET MAUI using Blazor Hybrid. Octane has multiple personalities, right? Because I've mentioned a few times now that you can build web applications or websites. And so it really depends, what your needs are. A lot of people are using Octane to build, full-featured web applications, right? Which are very interactive in nature. But then sometimes people just want to build a simple website that has a lot of static content in it, and they all want to take advantage of, the ability for people to be able to log in as content editors and use the security model so that, you can specify that some people can edit certain pages and others cannot. But the main activity that those people are performing is just managing the content on the kind of static website. And so Octane can be used for both. And in fact, I have these domain names reserved for Blazor Kit and Blazor CMS to kind of differentiate between the two different personas that are available within Octane. But actually, a lot of people also you can use kind of a hybrid approach, right? Because your web application may still have areas of it which require static content. And so that's why it makes sense to have both of these capabilities as part of the same application. If we talk about the roadmap for a minute, so the initial proof of concept of Octane was released in November of 2018. And that was when Blazor was still in a preview state, right? It wasn't experimental anymore, but it was, it hadn't been even released officially as part of .NET Core yet. And then the open source project for Octane was launched in 2019. And so that's when the open source project was first created. The initial framework code was uploaded, the community could get involved. In May of 2020 was the official launch of Octane 1.0, and that was on .NET Core 3.2. And then we've sort of ever since followed the release schedule of .NET itself. So every time there was a major release of .NET, we would have a major release of Octane. And so you'll see that, and usually that would happen, in November of each year. Microsoft has .NET Conf, and that's when they typically release a new version of .NET. There's only like 1 year with .NET 7 that things were a little bit off of that schedule. You'll see we had Octane 2 with .NET 5, Octane 3 with .NET 6, and so on. It was suggested earlier this year that it would make it easier for people to understand the versioning scheme if we actually aligned with .NET. So basically this coming week will be the release of .NET 10, and we are going to release Octane 10 as well. So from this point forward, the major version of Octane will reflect the major version of .NET that it's intended to run on. All right, now let's shift over and do a bit of a demonstration. All right, so I have the Visual Studio 2026 Insider version installed because I've been working on the .NET 10 migration, which we're going to be releasing this week. I have the latest code from the dev branch, from the Octane Framework dev branch loaded up here. You'll see that there's 3 projects. Like there's an Octane client project, an Octane server project, and an Octane shared project. The client project has all of the Razor components, and it has all of the services as well. The server project has the APIs, the controllers, it has the repositories, it has the scheduled jobs, it has all of the backend functionality. And then the shared project just has some shared capabilities. The main thing it has is the shared models, which are shared between the server and the client. If we go ahead and rerun this application, we're going to see the sort of default look and feel of Octane. It has its own sort of default theme out of the box, and then it installs with a certain amount of content. I can go ahead and I had already created an account previously, so I can log in using the account that I created, and this would be the self-hosted auth capability that I was talking about. So if I log in as the host user, I now have an additional page that's displayed here, this private page, which is only available to people who are logged into the site. Similarly, on this home page, there was a region of the page which is only visible to people who are logged in, and so that wasn't visible when I was logged out. It has a My Page capability, so if you want to have like a portal-like capability where each user, each person who's logged in can have their own page that they can customize, it has that capability as well. If we go to the home page and I click this pencil icon, we go into what we call edit mode, and in edit mode you can see the different regions of the page. Like there's a whole bunch of different content regions which have been defined. And then this default pane, we call them panes, has different types of content in it. So this one at the top here would be an instance of a module, which manages the welcome to Octane content. And then there's the license, which is a separate content instance. And if I go in to edit the content, you'll see that we can edit it directly within the UI. This is the Radzin text editor, which is the default editor that we're using, which is a very powerful, rich text editor. So that was really helpful for users who are kind of non-technical. All of the different versions of the changes that you make to the content are stored as well. So there's full versioning for the HTML text content. And so that's how you can make changes to your site very simply. If you want to add additional pages to your site, you go into the control panel and you can add pages or edit the configuration of existing pages, remove pages. You can also add modules to an existing page. And then you have this admin dashboard capability. And the admin dashboard allows you to get access to a whole lot of functionality that is provided by Octane by default. So the configuration of this particular site would be in site settings. And so we can specify, what page is our home page, what default time zone is the standard time zone that users are interacting from. It gives you information around the sitemap for this particular site. You can specify a custom theme. Maybe I'll change that for right now. So right now we're using the Octane theme, which is the default theme. There's also a Blazor theme, so we can make this look like, you know, the Blazor application that people are used to. And so just by changing the theme, right, the site is completely changed to look like the Blazor theme. And what else is in site settings? Lots of, like, you can change the rich text editor. You can specify your SMTP settings, you know, for sending emails. You have progressive web application support. You can specify the URLs that the site is available on. And this UI component settings area is an important one because it basically says that by default, the site is using static render mode. So most of the pages in the site are static in nature. But for those areas which are interactive, it's going to be using the server interactivity, meaning SignalR, like Blazor server. And specifying whether or not the pages need to be, or the components need to be pre-rendered, and whether or not the site supports the hybrid model or not. And so you have these configuration options on every site. And I'll show you in a moment here. If I go into the admin dashboard and I go into site management, this is where all of the different sites that are part of this installation would be set up. If I want to add another site, we'll just create a test site, and we're going to make it available on this URL. So the local host with the port number, then /test. So this will be the unique URL that this site's available on. We'll use the Octane theme as the default. We'll use static render mode, but we can specify different render mode if we want to. And again, we'll use the default site template. And in this case, we're just going to store the information in the same shared database. If I wanted to create a new database to store the information for this new site I'm creating, I can create the database here. I'm going to create it in the shared database. So if I say save, it'll create the new site. And so this is a new site that's available at this URL /test. And if I go back into my admin dashboard, site management, I can see I have 2 sites now that are part of this installation. I can browse back to the original site, or I can go to the new site. And we'll notice that each of these sites has their own distinct set of pages, their own set of users, their own set of security roles, files. You know, they have basically a full set of features that are distinct and like for that specific site. So we've talked about site settings. You can, you know, configure various aspects of the pages that are part of your site as well. So you've got the full list of pages that are scaffolded by default for you. You've got user management, where the set of users that are in this site would be available, and as an administrator, I can go in and I can manage them. So for example, if I needed to reset somebody's password, I could do that, or, you know, manage their security roles, I could do that. You know, this type of a rich kind of robust user management area is not something that's part of the standard scaffolded like UI identity framework. So this is where Octane goes much further in terms of providing a real good user management functionality. Profile management, I can actually go in and I can specify the user profile fields dynamically that I want to be able to manage for my users. And it's completely dynamic, so I can add as many different fields as I want or remove the fields that are here. And then those will appear in the user's profile. So this is the user profile for the host user that I'm logged in as, and this is where those fields are displayed that you've defined in the profile management. You got role management, where you can define different roles. You can define sort of an unlimited number of roles, and then you can assign those roles to the content management capabilities within the framework. You have a full file manager where you can create folders and upload files and specify the permissions of who's allowed to view or edit different files. Recycle bin is for pages or modules that have been deleted. URL mappings are for especially really helpful if you're migrating from, you know, another platform to Octane. You can specify your URL mappings so that, you know, you don't have broken links or 404s, right? They're going to be mapped to particular URLs which are part of this site. You can track visitors. There is a whole search engine that's part of Octane, which is tied in with the content. And that's where the search box up at the top kind of comes from, but there's a lot of configuration options around that. You can have multiple languages. So this would be the translations that I was talking about earlier. So you can specify that this site, supports multiple languages. You've got an event log where all of the different events that happen within the Octane framework are logged. That could be that could be errors, but also other types of events. And it'll give you, the full details for, when things happened, which user was responsible, various information that's quite helpful. We talked about site management. Module management are where the modules, so by default, we have this HTML text module, but we also have a bunch of admin modules as well that are available. If you want additional modules, you can say that I want to install a module, and these modules that are surfaced here are from the Octane Marketplace. And if I want to install one of these, I can just click download, and it'll download it as a NuGet package, which will then can be installed immediately and usable within your environment. You can also create a module, and by providing some basic information, it'll scaffold the code that's necessary to build a module for Octane. So giving you a complete starting point of a functional module that you can build. Similarly, you have that capability for themes. Themes are what define the look and feel of the site. And so you can create your own themes or downloaded themes that already exist. You have your scheduled jobs area, where you have scheduled jobs which are running. For example, by default, we have a notification job, which there's a notification API that modules can create messages in, and then it runs asynchronously and sends out those messages as email using SMTP. We also have a sort of housekeeping purge job, which keeps, which automatically has like retention policies for purging information out of the system to keep it performing well. And then the search index runs continuously as well, monitoring if there's new content that needs to be indexed so that it can be available within the search engine. It's got the ability to interact with your databases as well. So you can actually write SQL queries if you're, and of course I'm logged in as the host user, which is the most powerful user in the site. So SQL management is only available to the host user, not available to other types of users. But as usually when you're developing in Octane, you'd be logged in as the host user. And this is quite handy to have available when you're doing software development, right? If you're testing things, you might want to write a simple query to see if the data looks correct. System info tells us that we are running on Octane 10, which is on .NET 10, and it gives you a bunch of additional information about the environment that might be helpful, like where certain folders are, where the files are stored, and code is stored. We've got the ability to set some options, which define how errors are dealt with. There is a log as well for errors that might arise that are not part of of an individual site. And then the database migrations also have the ability to be surfaced as well, so that you can, as a developer, track down maybe where a database migration didn't run successfully. And we've got a system update capability as well, which allows you to actually update the framework automatically, much like you can in kind of WordPress. And then we have a setting management capability as well, which allows you to manage various settings that are part of the system. So huge amount of functionality that's available there. The one thing that I wanted to show you is for Octane 10, specifically, and in .NET 10, Microsoft introduced some new capabilities around passkeys. So if I go into the admin dashboard, actually I'm going to switch back to my default site. And I'm going to go to the user management area, and I'm going to the settings. In my user settings, I have the ability now to say that, yeah, I want to use passkeys. And passkeys are sort of that whole passwordless authentication capability that is becoming more and more popular. And this was a capability that was provided by Microsoft in .NET Identity and .NET 10. And so we've integrated that into Octane. I guess another thing I'll show you in here is we have, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to have external login. So, for example, I have this set up so I can also log in with Microsoft Entra as well if I want to. And I have all of the configuration options available to me. So if I go back to the home page and I log out for a moment, and I say I want to log in, because I've set up Microsoft Entra, I can log in using Microsoft Entra. Previously, I logged in using the self-hosted authentication capability here, but I also can log in using a passkey. So first of all, let's try using Microsoft Entra. So if I say Microsoft Entra, it redirected me to the DevEssence Entra endpoint. I was already logged in there. It redirected me back, and I'm logged in as the host user because I'd already logged in previously, and I was mapped. I had mapped my user based on the email address. So that works well. If I log out and I go to log in and I choose use passkey, it comes up with the Windows Hello. And I know that it's this profile here that I want to use, and I say OK. And then I can enter my PIN code, and I'm logged in as the host user. So we've got many different authentication capabilities that are part of Octane that are all like wired up and functional, that make it really easy for developers to build applications and websites that have modern authentication capabilities without having to build it from scratch. So that's just like one of the many capabilities that Octane has. And so I guess with that, I will go back to my slides, and I think I'm at the end of my time now. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to share a bit about Octane with you. It's a very powerful framework. It's open source, of course, and so you can go to GitHub and you can find the Octane framework, and you can take a look at the code. You can very easily install it, and it's all ready for .NET 10, which is going to be released here in a couple of days. So very exciting. So thanks again for having me, and if you have any questions, please send me an email.
All right. Thank you to Sean for talking to us about Octane. Apologies that he can't be here to take questions live because I saw some chatter during his session. So, all right. We have one more sponsored segment that we'd like to go through, and that's from our friends at Sentry. Those of you who might have been around for a while, you've heard of Sentry and their logging and telemetry platform. They sent us a short video as well and tell you a little bit about their platform and some of the things they have coming up.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex Son from Sentry. Thank you so much for .NET Foundation for having us here. So I'll be going through what Sentry is, how it can help you, and I'll be going through a couple of demos, telling you how things work and showing off some of the features that we have. So Sentry is an application monitoring platform. It allows you to send exceptions, logs, any kind of metadata from your applications, and have them all in one place so you can fix your issues quickly. Sentry has about 790 billion events coming in per month from around 4 million developers across 130,000 organizations. Let's get into it. Let's get into the demo. So here is the website, sentry.io. If you make an account and make an organization, this is what you will see. And you'll be able to create a new project in 3 steps. And for now, we're going to create an ASP.NET Core. And you can set your alerts, and you can connect it via Slack, Discord, Microsoft Teams, and it allows you to see the alerts in whatever channel you want. So let's create a project. But while that's happening, I'm gonna go over to, I'm gonna run the server first. So to let you know that this server is broken. So yeah, we just did the .NET run, and an unhandled exception occurred while processing the request. So let's say we want to fix this with Sentry. So let's just copy these. So actually, before we have to download the SDK itself. And there we go. And we need to change some stuff, but not a lot, in our app. So this is all we added. I already had that set up. So I'm just going to copy the DSN for now. So, oh, yes, that's right. And let's do .NET Run again. That's it. That's all the things I need to do to set Sentry up in my ASP.NET Core application. So once we click this again, there's an exception. So the event was received by Sentry. So let's go to our errors. So here we can see what kind of error has occurred. And in this case, we threw an exception by ourselves. An exception thrown by, yes, that's the description that I put. And you can see all kinds of metadata about the machine that the user was on and what kind of OS the server was on and so forth. So for example, we were on Mac OS and we were using .NET 9.0.8. And we can also see the stack trees about exactly where in the program that we crashed at line number 27 and column 5. And we can see all these information, including logs. We can see logs before when the error occurred. So, and a lot of these just metadata if you're interested. And you can also see which browser the user was using. You can see the location as well. You can turn off some of the sensitive information to be shown in the settings if you look at the documentation. But yeah, that's a really quick way to start using Sentry in your applications. And this is the bare basics. I'll be showing you more advanced features that we have. But even this is really useful to have as a developer, I think. So speaking of more advanced features, let's check them out. So I have this Maui application. And there's 2 buttons here. There's a counter click button here. And if we click crash, then the app will crash. So I already have this set up here. So here's the issue that we were having. And we essentially, we can see that it was run on Android 16, makes sense. And we can see, again, where exactly it has crashed. So we have a function called onCrashClicked, and that's where it crashed. And we can see the screenshots as well. This is right before the crash happened. And there's a really cool thing called session replay. So session replay allows you to look back on what every action the user has done leading up to the event that happened. And I'm going to see if there's a better replay. So, for example, you can see here that how many times we clicked and how many times, we can see all the replays that we have for this issue. And this one's, so if we were to view the full replay, you see all kinds of things that we did in the app right before the crash actually happened. So we did like a bunch of button presses, and we did another button press. The final button press was probably what caused the crash. And that's a really cool way to see what kind of actions led up to this bug and trying to recreate that bug in your local environment or something. So you don't have to guess whatever the person did. Hey, what did this person do to get this obscure error? And this is really useful for that situations. And going back to our issue here, we can also use Seer. Seer is an AI debugging agent, and it allows you to gather all these information about what happened in this issue, and you can start a root cause analysis. And this is really cool. It gathers all the data from the issue and tries to fix them. And you can also set up a GitHub integration with Seer, so Seer can create a pull request all by itself. So here it knows that the application's endpoint handler intentionally throws a system exception. So yeah, that's true. I intentionally threw an exception. So it's pretty good at figuring out what the causes are. So the next thing I have to show you is this new cool thing I'm working on called AI agent monitoring. Essentially, when you have an LLM application, you want to track how many tokens you've used, how long it took for each of these requests to go through, and maybe what's the bottleneck in these LLM calls. And for example, if I have this, yeah. So if I click this trace, then we can see how long the whole LLM call took. So in this case, it took almost 12 seconds to complete this call. The first chat took 4 seconds to complete, and it called like a bunch of tools like get person's age, get weather, complex calculation, and here it returns to chat again and calls another tool, and we come up with a final output. So it's a really cool way to sort of profile your LLM usage and see where and when it's unexceptionally high. So for example, this one was 85% slower than the average. So maybe there's something wrong there. And again, these all have metadata that you can look at very closely. And this is not out yet in .NET, but I am working on creating an SDK for AI agent monitoring in .NET. So keep an eye out for that. And the cool thing about Sentry's SDKs are they're all open source. You can go to our GitHub repos, create some issues if you don't like something, if you want to propose a change, if you want to create a new feature, or you can also just make a pull request and try to improve Sentry's .NET SDK. And we also have employees helping you that could help you in those GitHub repositories. And or you can also come to our Discord channel where people can answer your questions as well. If you have any troubles, yeah, visit Discord or hit us up in GitHub issues. And we're also going to support .NET 10 as soon as it comes out. We already have a NuGet preview out for version 6 of our SDK, which should support .NET 10 RC2. And that's in progress, but hopefully hopefully you can try it out and see if it works. If not, again, GitHub issues. And if you'd like to learn more about Sentry, then come onto our docs and read up more about it, or hit us up, contact us. We're always here to help you. Thanks again for .NET Foundations for hosting this event, and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Sentry, for being a partner. And that brings us to the end of the, say, 2025 .NET Foundation Summit. Thank you, everyone who hung out with us today through all the sessions. Thank you to Tim, Thomas, and Sean for doing presentations on their various projects that they're a part of. And if you have any questions at all about the .NET Foundation, we'd love to answer them. .NETfoundation.org, and all of our contact information is there. So we're going to go and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and we'll see you around social media. Don't forget about .NET Conf starts tomorrow and goes for the next 3 days. I'm actually doing a session there on the .NET Foundation, very similar to the talk that I did at the beginning of today. But if you're able, please come out and join me and hang out and ask some questions. Everybody enjoy the rest of your Monday. Take care.